The plains whispered under a blood-orange sunset, their golden grasses swaying like an ocean beneath the vast Wyoming sky. Sarah Bennett stood at the window of the one-room schoolhouse, her slender fingers pressing against the glass as if reaching for the fading light. The wind carried dust and memories across the empty schoolyard, a reminder of how far she had come from the cobblestone streets of Boston. 3 months in Silverwind, and still the silence of the frontier startled her. She turned back to her desk, littered with the day's assignments. 23 pupils ranging from 6 to 15 years old, their handwriting as varied as their circumstances. Sarah adjusted the oil lamp, the soft glow illuminating her tired features. At 25, she already felt the weight of years beyond her age, a heaviness carried from a life she'd left behind. Proper punctuation matters, Thomas, she whispered to herself, marking a correction on a 10-year-old's composition. The difference between "let's eat grandmother" and "let's eat grandmother" could be quite consequential. A smile tugged at her lips. These small moments, finding humor in a child's innocent mistake, were what kept her tethered to this new life. Teaching had become her salvation, the only constant in a world that had proven itself unreliable. The wooden floors creaked beneath her as she moved around the classroom, straightening desks and collecting forgotten items. A hair ribbon, a small, whittled horse, a slate pencil worn to a nub. Each item telling its own story of the children who filled this room with life during daylight hours. Outside, the last rays of sun disappeared behind the distant mountains, plunging Silverwind into the blue-gray twilight that preceded true darkness. Sarah lit a second lamp, pushing back the encroaching shadows. She should head to her small, attached quarters, prepare a simple supper, perhaps read a few pages of Emerson before sleep claimed her. Yet something held her in place, a reluctance to end another day that was indistinguishable from the one before. This was her routine now. Teach, grade, prepare, sleep, repeat, a clockwork existence that kept her functioning but not truly living. Sarah tucked a wayward strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. The mirror above the wash basin reflected a face she sometimes failed to recognize. Pale from too many hours indoors, green eyes that had lost their spot-arch lips, that had forgotten how to form a genuine smile. Not the face of the vibrant young woman who had once dreamed of adventure and romance, before James Sullivan had destroyed those dreams. The memory of her former husband surfaced unwelcomed, bringing with it the familiar ache. His handsome face, always quick, with a charming smile. The promises he'd made under Boston's manicured gardens. The betrayal that followed when she discovered him in their marital bed with her own cousin. Sarah closed her eyes, willing the images away. That life was behind her now. The divorce had scandalized her family, but she couldn't bear to stay to face the pitying glances and whispered gossip. The teaching position in Wyoming had been an escape, a chance to reinvent herself where no one knew her name or her shame. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing Sarah from her thoughts. The plains had grown dark, the stars emerging like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. She gathered her shawl around her shoulders, finally ready to retire for the evening. That's when she heard it, the heavy thud of boots on the schoolhouse steps. Sarah froze, her heart leaping to her throat. Visitors were rare in Silverwind, especially after sundown. The town's few establishments closed early, its inhabitants rising and retiring with the sun. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding thin and uncertain. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, then another footstep, deliberate and slow. A shadow fell across the window, massive and looming. Sarah reached for the drawer of her desk, fingers closing around the small derringer her father had insisted she carry to the savage territories. She'd never fired it, had hoped she would never need to. The door hinges groaned as if bearing a great weight, and the wooden frame swung open. A man stood silhouetted against the night, so tall he needed to duck beneath the doorframe. Broad-shouldered and imposing, he removed his hat as he entered, revealing features carved from shadow and stone. His face bore the weathered look of someone who lived beneath the open sky, deep lines etched around eyes the color of a winter scoan. A thick beard couldn't hide the scar that ran along his jawline, nor could his long coat disguise the powerful frame beneath. "Miss Bennett." His voice was deep, rough, like gravel underfoot, yet he spoke her name with an unsettling familiarity. Sarah's grip tightened on the hidden gun. "How do you know my name?" The stranger stepped fully into the lamplight, and Sarah fought the urge to step back. He was easily the largest man she'd ever seen, towering over her small frame, his presence filling the schoolroom. His dark hair streaked with silver at the temples was longer than fashion dictated, tied back at the nape of his neck. Everyone knows the school teacher's name. His eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Mason Rivers. Most call me Stone. He didn't offer his hand, and Sarah didn't extend hers. Instead, she straightened her spine, trying to project an authority she didn't feel. Mr. Rivers' school hours ended some time ago. If you have business concerning one of the children, you can return tomorrow. Something flashed in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or something darker. I'm not here about any child, Miss Bennett. Then why are you here? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with fear. Stone moved further into the room, his movements surprisingly graceful for a man of his size. He ran a calloused finger along one of the student desks, examining the classroom with deliberate care. I've been watching you. 3 simple words that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Her mind filled with terrible possibilities. Had he been sent by James? Was he one of the frontier predators she'd been warned about? Her fingers found the Derringer's trigger. That's rather inappropriate, Mr. Rivers. Maybe. He turned those unsettling eyes back to her. But necessary. I think you should leave. Sarah was proud that her voice didn't tremble. I've seen how you look out that window every evening. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. How you stare at the horizon like it might offer answers. How your smile fades the moment those children leave. Heat rushed to Sarah's cheeks. How long had he been watching her, and how had he seen so much? Mr. Rivers. I've seen you fading away, he interrupted, his voice softer now, almost gentle, despite its roughness. Day by day, disappearing into these walls. Sarah felt exposed, as if this stranger had somehow peered into her soul and named the emptiness she'd tried to ignore. Anger flared, a protective barrier against vulnerability. You know nothing about me. I know enough. Stone moved closer, and Sarah instinctively backed away until her spine pressed against the blackboard. I know you're dying here, Miss Bennett. A slow death of routine and loneliness. Her breath caught. How could this stranger articulate what she had barely acknowledged to herself? I've been watching you for weeks, he continued, and tonight I decided it was time. Time for what? Sarah whispered, the Derringer now fully drawn from the drawer concealed in the folds of her skirt. Stone's eyes reflected the lamplight as he spoke words that would change everything. I'm claiming you tonight, little one. Time seemed to stop, the schoolroom suspended in silence, save for the distant howl of prairie wind. Fear and outrage mingled in Sarah's chest, but beneath them stirred something unexpected. Curiosity. Claiming me, she repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm not a plot of land, Mr. Rivers. I don't belong to anyone. Something like approval flickered across his face. Good, there's still fight in you. With deliberate slowness, he lowered himself onto one of the children's desks, which creaked ominously beneath his weight. The action should have diminished his imposing presence, but somehow he seemed to command the room even more. You misunderstand me, Miss Bennett. I'm not here to harm you. And then what exactly do you mean by claiming me? The Derringer remained hidden but ready. Stone's gaze traveled around the room before settling back on her. I mean saving you from this. He gestured to the tidy classroom with its neat rows of desks. From dying inch by inch in this box, you've made your world. 1,000 protests rose to Sarah's lips, about propriety, about his presumption, about her choices being her own. But the words that escaped surprised even her. Why would you care whether I live or die, Mr. Rivers? You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I know what it looks like when someone's just going through the motions of living. I recognize it because I've been there. For the first time, Sarah noticed something beneath the hard exterior. A shadow of grief in his eyes, quickly masked but undeniably present. What are you proposing exactly? Sarah asked, curiosity momentarily overriding caution. Stone stood his full height, imposing once more. Come with me. Tonight. See what exists beyond these walls. Sarah nearly laughed at the absurdity. You want me to leave with a stranger in the middle of the night? Have you lost your mind? Probably. The corner of his mouth twitched almost a smile. But I'm offering you a chance to remember what it feels like to be alive. And if I refuse, then I walk out that door and you can return to your papers and your solitude. His voice softened. Your choice, Miss Bennett. I don't force anyone to do anything. Sarah should have been relieved by his words, should have ordered him to leave immediately. Yet something in his offer resonated with a buried part of herself. The adventurous girl who had existed before disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be cautious. Why tonight? Stone moved toward the door, picking up his hat. Because the stars are particularly clear tonight, and there's a place on the ridge where the whole valley looks like it's filled with fallen stars. It was perhaps the most poetic thing that she'd expected from this rough man, and it caught her off guard. I have classes tomorrow. You'll be back before dawn. Sarah's mind raced. This was madness. Reckless. Perhaps dangerous. Yet the thought of another evening alone in her quarters, another night staring at the ceiling and counting the hours until morning seemed suddenly unbearable. Wait, she heard herself say as Stone reached for the door. Let me get my coat. The night air bit through Sarah's woolen coat as Stone helped her onto his horse, a massive black stallion that matched its owner in temperament and size. Despite her protests, he insisted she ride in front, his arms creating a secure cage around her as he took the reins. I can ride my own horse, Mr. Rivers. I'm not incompetent. Never said you were. But Thunder knows the path in the dark and will make better time together. His logic was sound, but Sarah was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid wall of his chest at her back, the strength in the arms that encircled her without touching. She hadn't been this close to a man since James, and the comparison couldn't have been more stark. James with his elegant suits and manicured hands, Stone with his rough denim and calloused palms. They rode in silence, leaving the sleeping town behind. The plains opened before them, a sea of silver-blue grass under the moonlight. Sarah had always viewed this landscape from a distance through windows and from the relative safety of the town's boundaries. Now she was immersed in it, the vastness both terrifying and exhilarating. Where exactly are you taking me, Mr. Rivers? You can drop the Mr. Rivers. Just Stone. That's not an answer. She felt rather than heard his chuckle, a brief rumble against her back. Patience, Miss Bennett. If I'm to call you Stone, then you should call me Sarah. Sarah. He tested her name, the single word somehow intimate in his rough voice. It suits you better than Miss Bennett. They rode higher into the rolling hills that bordered the eastern edge of Silverwind. The air grew colder, sharper with the scent of pine and sage. Sarah found herself relaxing, incrementally lulled by the rhythm of hoofbeats and the unexpected security she felt within Stone's presence. There, Stone's voice broke the silence as he pointed toward a flat outcropping ahead. That's where we're headed. He brought Thunder to a halt at the edge of a natural plateau, dismounting with fluid grace before reaching up to help Sarah down. His hands spanned her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. When her feet touched the ground, he released her immediately, respecting her space. This way, he said, gesturing toward the outcropping. Sarah followed, picking her way carefully across the rocky ground. When she reached the edge, she gasped. Below them stretched the entire valley, Silverwind, a collection of tiny lights in the distance. But it was the sky that stole her breath, an endless canopy of stars, more than she had ever seen, blazing with impossible brightness. The moon cast silver light across the landscape, transforming the plains into an otherworldly sea that appeared to reflect the stars themselves. It's beautiful, she whispered, the word inadequate for the majesty before her. Stone stood beside her, his face upturned to the heavens. This is what you've been missing, locked away in that schoolhouse. Sarah couldn't argue. She had forgotten such beauty existed, had stopped looking for it in her determination to simply survive. Thank you for showing me this. Stone nodded, then moved away to gather fallen branches. With practiced efficiency, he built a small fire, the flames creating a circle of warmth in the chill night air. He gestured for Sarah to sit on a flat rock near the fire, then took a position across from her, the flames between them. In the flickering light, with the stars overhead and the vast wilderness surrounding them, Sarah studied the man who had disrupted her carefully ordered existence. There was a stillness to him, a self-contained quality that suggested comfort with solitude. Yet he had reached out to her, a stranger. Why did you really bring me here, Stone? His eyes reflected the firelight as he considered her question. Because everyone deserves to be reminded that the world is bigger than their pain. The simple statement struck a chord so deep that Sarah felt tears threatening. She blinked them away, unwilling to reveal such vulnerability. And what pain are you running from? She asked instead. Something darkened in his expression. Who says I'm running? Aren't we all out here? Sarah gestured to the wilderness around them. Silverwind isn't exactly a destination. It's where people land when they're fleeing something else. Stone was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, tinged with something she couldn't quite name. Maybe, but sometimes what looks like running is just searching. For what? His eyes met hers across the flames, for whatever was lost. The conversation stilled both of them, watching the fire dance between them. Sarah hadn't expected this thoughtfulness from him, this depth beneath the rough exterior. She had judged him too quickly, she realized, something she had sworn not to do after experiencing the sting of others' judgments. I came here from Boston, she offered, not entirely sure why she was sharing this with him, after my divorce. If he was shocked by her revelation, divorce being scandalous enough without a woman admitting to it openly, he didn't show it. Hard journey for a woman alone. Harder to stay. The words carried more weight than she intended, heavy with unspoken pain. Stone nodded as if he understood completely. The physical distance doesn't always match the emotional one. No, Sarah agreed softly. It doesn't. They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable now, a shared understanding in the quiet. Sarah found herself studying his profile as he gazed into the fire. The strong jaw, the scar that told of violence, survived the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting against sun and storm. What do you do, Stone and Silverwind? Pass through, mostly. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Ranch work when it's available. Breaking horses no one else can tame. You don't have a permanent home? The sky's my roof. His lips curved slightly. Been that way for a long time. Doesn't it get lonely? The question slipped out before she could consider its implication. Stone's eyes found hers penetrating in their intensity. Lonely is relative, Sarah. You can be surrounded by people and still be the loneliest person in the room. The truth of his words silenced her. How many evenings had she spent precisely that way, smiling at church socials, nodding at town meetings, engaging in pleasant but meaningless conversations with people who didn't truly see her? I should get you back, Stone said after a while, rising to his feet. You have children to teach tomorrow. The reminder of her responsibilities jarred Sarah from the strange, suspended moment they had shared. Reality rushed back. She was alone on a hillside with a man she barely knew, miles from town, behaving in a way that would horrify the proper Bostonians of her past. Yet she felt no fear, no regret. For the first time in months, she felt awake. Stone extinguished the fire with methodical care, ensuring no ember remained to threaten the dry grassland. When he extended his hand to help her up, Sarah took it without hesitation. His palm was rough against hers, warm and enveloping. Thank you, she said simply. Knowing he would understand, she meant more than the assistance. They rode back in the same formation, but the silence between them had transformed, laden with unspoken thoughts and newfound awareness. Sarah found herself hyper-conscious of his presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his coat against her back, when Thunder navigated a steep incline. The schoolhouse emerged from the darkness looking smaller, somehow more confined than when she had left it. Stone brought Thunder to a halt at the steps, dismounting, before helping Sarah down. This time his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. Still think I was wrong to claim you tonight, he asked, his voice a low rumble. Sarah should have been offended by the phrasing, by the presumption. Instead, she found herself smiling. A real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in too long. I still object to the terminology, Mr. Rivers, she said, deliberately using his surname again. But perhaps not to the result. Something like satisfaction crossed his features. Good night, Miss Bennett. He waited until she was safely inside before mounting Thunder and disappearing into the night, becoming one with the shadows from which he had emerged hours earlier. Sarah stood at the window watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did she realize she had left the Derringer in her desk drawer, untouched and forgotten. Sleep came easier that night than it had in months, her dreams filled with stars and open skies. The children noticed the change in her the next day. You look different, Miss Bennett, said Emma Wilson, a small, solemn-faced 10-year-old who rarely spoke unless called upon. Like you found something you lost. Sarah blinked at the perceptiveness of the child. Emma had always been observant, her quiet demeanor concealing a sharp mind. Unlike the other children from more prosperous families, Emma came to school in mended dresses, her honey blonde hair neatly braided, but her shoes worn thin. Her mother, Margaret, was a widow who took in laundry and mending to support them, their small cabin at the edge of town, a testament to her determination to provide for her daughter despite circumstances. Do I? Sarah smiled, touching Emma's shoulder lightly. Perhaps I did, Emma. Sometimes we forget to look at the stars. The girl's brow furrowed. My pa used to say the stars are windows where angels peek through. Sarah's heart contracted at the wistful tone. Emma rarely mentioned her father, who had died in a mining accident 2 years earlier. That's a lovely thought, Sarah said softly. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. Emma nodded seriously. He was. Ma says I have his eyes. Before Sarah could respond, Thomas Jenkins, the sheriff's son and the classroom's self-appointed disruptor, called out from across the room. Emma's pa wasn't wise, he was drunk. That's why he fell down the mine shaft. The cruel words landed like physical blows. Emma's face crumpled, her small shoulders hunching as if to make herself an even smaller target. Around them, several children snickered, while others looked uncomfortable. Sarah felt heat rise to her face, anger flaring bright and immediate. Thomas Jenkins. Her voice cut through the classroom, sharper than she had ever used with her students. That is enough. The boy's smug expression faltered under her glare. I was just saying what everyone knows. What you were doing, Sarah interrupted, crossing the room to stand before his desk, was being deliberately cruel to a classmate. That is unacceptable behavior in this classroom and in life. Thomas slumped in his seat, but his eyes held defiance rather than remorse. Sarah recognized the look, the stubborn pride of a boy learning to become the wrong kind of man. You will apologize to Emma immediately, and you will remain after school to discuss your behavior further. My pa says, your father is not here, Sarah said firmly. I am your teacher, and in this room we treat each other with kindness and respect. Now apologize. The boy muttered something that barely passed for an apology. Emma kept her eyes fixed on her slate, her small face rigid with the effort of not crying. Sarah made a mental note to speak with Sheriff Jenkins about his son's behavior, though she suspected it would do little good. The sheriff was known to frequent the saloon more than his office, and his parenting seemed to consist mainly of indulgence, interrupted by impatience. The incident cast a shadow over the morning lessons. Sarah found herself watching Emma more closely, noticing how the other children subtly excluded her, leaving an empty space beside her at lunch, picking teams for games with Emma chosen last. It wasn't outright bullying, but the quiet ostracism that children inflicted with such casual cruelty. By afternoon, Sarah had made a decision. When the final bell rang and the children gathered their things, she called Emma to her desk. Would you stay a moment, Emma? I'd like to speak with you. She glanced at Thomas, who was slinking toward the door. You as well, Thomas. We have a matter to discuss. The boy slouched back to his desk, shooting a venomous look at Emma. Sarah waited until the other children had filed out before addressing him. Thomas, your behavior today was unkind and disrespectful. More importantly, it was untrue. Everyone says, I'm not interested in gossip. Sarah cut him off. I'm interested in facts and in character. Emma's father died in a tragic accident. Using that to hurt her shows poor character on your part. Thomas stared at the floor, his expression sullen. Sarah sighed inwardly. She had hoped to reach him, but she recognized the wall he had erected, the same one she had seen in his father's eyes when he dismissed concerns about disturbances at the saloon. For the next week, you will use your lunch period to help me organize the book cupboard. Perhaps sometime in quiet reflection will help you consider the impact of your words. Yes, ma'am, he mumbled, clearly unrepentant. You may go. Sarah watched him snatch his cap and storm out the door, slamming behind him. She turned to Emma, who remained perfectly still at her desk, hands folded in her lap. Emma, she said gently, moving to sit beside the girl rather than looming over her. I want you to know that what Thomas said was wrong. Not just unkind, but incorrect. Emma's eyes remained downcast. It's what everyone thinks. People can think many things that aren't true, Sarah said. I never met your father, but I know he must have been a good man to have such a thoughtful, intelligent daughter. A ghost of a smile touched Emma's lips, there and gone in an instant. He taught me my letters before I ever came to school, and how to identify bird calls. He sounds wonderful. Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Does this happen often, the other children being unkind?" Emma shrugged a painfully adult gesture on such small shoulders. "Not all the time. Mostly they just don't notice me, except when Mom mends their clothes and they recognize the stitching." The simple statement revealed volumes about Emma's social standing in the small community. Margaret Wilson's skill with a needle kept her and Emma from destitution, but it also marked them as servants to the more prosperous families. "Would you like to help me after school sometimes?" Sarah asked, inspiration striking. "I could use assistance organizing the library, and perhaps we could read together. I have some books from back east that I think you might enjoy." Emma's face brightened instantly, her blue eyes widening. "Really, I could help you." "You'd be doing me a favor," Sarah assured her, "and it would give your mother a little more time for her work." "She worries about me walking home alone," Emma confided. "But I'm not afraid. I know which plants are safe to eat if I ever got lost and how to follow the creek back to town." Sarah smiled at the girl's earnestness. "You're very resourceful, Emma. That's an important quality." Emma straightened, a little pride momentarily overcoming her habitual caution. "Pa said I was born knowing how to survive." A wise observation. Sarah stood gently, guiding Emma to her feet as well. "Shall we say Tuesdays and Thursdays after school? We can start tomorrow." Emma nodded eagerly. "Yes, please, Miss Bennett." "Excellent. Now you should head home before your mother worries." After Emma had gathered her things and departed with a shy wave, Sarah sank into her chair, troubled by the day's revelations. She had always tried to create an environment of equality in her classroom, but she had clearly missed the subtle dynamics that left children like Emma isolated. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Heavy boots on the wooden steps, a sound she now recognized. Stone filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking the afternoon light. He didn't enter this time, remaining on the threshold as if awaiting permission. "Mr. Rivers," Sarah acknowledged, surprised by the flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Twice in 2 days. People will talk. Let them." He removed his hat, revealing hair darkened by sweat from the day's labor. "You left something behind last night." From his pocket, he produced a small, carved wooden star, its surface polished smooth, intricate patterns etched into each point. "I didn't bring anything with me," Sarah said, confused. "No," Stone agreed, a hint of that almost smile playing at his lips. "But you found something. Thought you might want a reminder." He placed the star on the nearest desk, the wood gleaming in the afternoon light. Sarah rose and moved toward it, picking up the carving with careful fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each line precise and deliberate. "Did you make this?" Stone nodded once. "Had time this morning." The gift was unexpected, thoughtful in a way that contradicted his gruff exterior. Sarah ran her thumb over the smooth surface, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful, thank you." He nodded again, already turning to leave, hat back in place. "Be seeing you, Miss Bennett." "Sarah," she corrected softly. This time the smile reached his eyes, transforming his severe features for just a moment. "Sarah." She watched him stride away, his long legs carrying him swiftly across the schoolyard. Only when he disappeared from view did she notice Emma Wilson standing near the corner of the building, her wide eyes following Stone's retreating figure with a mixture of awe and fear. Sarah tucked the wooden star into her pocket, suddenly aware of how her interaction with Stone might appear to others, especially impressionable children. She would need to be more careful, maintain the proper boundaries expected of a school teacher. Yet as she returned to her desk, her fingers strayed to the carved star, tracing its edges with a small, secret smile. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Sarah taught her classes with renewed energy, spending her afternoons with Emma twice a week. The girl blossomed under individual attention, her natural intelligence finding outlet in the books Sarah provided. They read together, discussed ideas beyond the standard curriculum, and sometimes simply talked. About Emma's memories of her father, about Sarah's life in Boston, carefully edited about their observations of the natural world around them. Stone appeared irregularly but predictably, always at dusk, always waiting at the edge of the schoolyard until the last child had gone. Sometimes he brought small treasures, an unusual rock, a falcon feather, once a wild rose that must have been carried miles from the nearest possible growth. He never stayed long, rarely entered the schoolhouse, but each brief encounter left Sarah more intrigued by the contradictions he embodied. A month into this strange courtship, for Sarah had begun to recognize it as such despite its unconventional nature. Stone arrived earlier than usual, catching her as she dismissed the children for the day. Miss Bennett, Tommy Clark, the blacksmith's youngest, tugged at her skirt with urgent excitement. There's a giant outside. Sarah glanced up to see Stone standing at the edge of the schoolyard, his towering figure causing a ripple of whispers among the departing children. Some stared openly, while others gave him a wide berth, clearly intimidated. That's Mr. Rivers' Tommy, she corrected gently, and it's not polite to call people giants. But he's so big, Tommy insisted. Pa says he can bend horseshoes with his bare hands. Whether he can or not, he deserves the same respect we show everyone, Sarah said firmly, though she couldn't help but wonder if the rumor was true. Stone's strength was evident in his build, in the way he moved with controlled power. The children dispersed, though many cast curious glances back at the imposing figure who had become the subject of growing speculation in Silverwind. Sarah had heard the whispers, that Stone was an outlaw hiding from the law, that he had killed men in the war, that he lived wild in the hills like a mountain lion. She had deliberately avoided asking him about his past, recognizing in him the same desire for privacy that she cherished herself. Stone approached only when the last child had gone, his expression unreadable as always. You're good with them. Thank you. Sarah smiled, oddly pleased by his observation. They're good children, mostly. Saw that boy giving the Wilson girl trouble again. Sarah's smile faded. Thomas Jenkins. Yes, he seems determined to make Emma's life difficult. I've spoken to his father, but... She trailed off, unwilling to criticize the sheriff openly. Some boys only understand the strength. Stone said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. I don't believe in ruling through fear or intimidation, Mr. Rivers. Stone, he corrected automatically. And I wasn't suggesting that. But sometimes a child needs to learn how to stand up for themselves. Sarah considered his words, thinking of Emma's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes when faced with Thomas's taunts. Perhaps, but Emma is so small, and Thomas is nearly 14. Size isn't everything. For the first time, Sarah heard genuine amusement in Stone's voice. The smallest wolves often have the sharpest teeth. The image of gentle Emma as a wolf made Sarah laugh. I'm not sure her mother would appreciate that comparison. Stone's expression sobered. How is her mother? I heard she's been ill. The question surprised Sarah. She hadn't realized Stone was aware of Margaret Wilson's situation. She's recovering, but slowly. The doctor says it's exhaustion and a lung inflammation. Emma's been taking on more responsibilities at home. Stone nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon. Meant to ask, you free to ride out tonight? Want to show you something? The abrupt change of subject was typical of him, but the invitation sent a thrill through Sarah. Their nighttime excursion had remained a secret treasured memory, one she had begun to think might not be repeated. I should check on Emma and her mother first, Sarah said, already mentally rearranging her evening plans. What time? After sundown, I'll come by the schoolhouse. With that, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly out of sight. Sarah watched him go, aware of a lightness in her chest that had been absent for too long. Later, as dusk painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold, Sarah made her way to the Wilson cabin. The small structure sat at the edge of town, its weathered boards and patched roof a testament to Margaret's determination to maintain independence despite limited means. Emma answered, her knock face lighting up at the sight of her teacher. Miss Bennett, are you coming for supper? We have stew, but not much meat in it. That's very kind, Emma, but I just wanted to check on your mother. How is she feeling today? Better, Emma said, stepping back to allow Sarah entry. She sat up and did some mending this afternoon. The cabin's interior was spare but meticulously clean, every surface polished, the few possessions arranged with care. Margaret Wilson sat in a rocking chair near the small fireplace, a pile of mending in her lap. She was a faded version of her daughter, the same honey blonde hair now streaked with gray, the same blue eyes now shadowed with exhaustion. Miss Bennett, she greeted, her voice thin but welcoming. This is a pleasant surprise. I hope I'm not intruding, Sarah said, taking the wooden stool Emma offered. I wanted to see how you were recovering. Margaret smiled weakly. Slowly but surely. Dr. Simmons says another week of rest should see me back on my feet properly. That's wonderful news. Sarah hesitated, then asked, Is there anything you need? Anything I can help with? A flicker of pride crossed Margaret's pale features. You're very kind, but we're managing. The church ladies brought food and Emma has been my right hand. Emma interrupted, unusual excitement in her voice. Tell Miss Bennet about the basket. Margaret's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. Someone left a basket on our doorstep last night. Food, medicine, even a new blanket. No note, no name. A secret benefactor, Sarah murmured, remembering Stone's unexpected inquiry about Margaret's health. Emma thinks it was an angel, Margaret said with a fond smile. I suspect it was Reverend Porter's doing, though he denied it when I sent Emma to thank him. Sarah thought of Stone's calloused hands crafting the delicate wooden star, his gruff voice asking about a widow's health. An angel seemed an unlikely description for the imposing cowboy, yet the timing was too coincidental to ignore. Perhaps angels come in unexpected forms, she said softly. She stayed a while longer, listening to Emma read aloud from one of the books they had been studying together, pleased by the girl's growing confidence. When she finally took her leave, the sun had set, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue sky. Stone was waiting at the schoolhouse as promised, thunder pawing impatiently at the ground. Without a word, he helped Sarah onto the horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. This time she settled against his chest without hesitation, finding strange comfort in his solid presence. They rode away from town, but in a different direction than their previous journey. The land dipped into a shallow valley before rising again, the path winding through stands of pine and aspen. Above them, stars blazed in impossible numbers, the moon, a silver crescent, casting just enough light to navigate by. Where are we going? Sarah asked, breaking the companionable silence. Place I found, Stone answered, his voice close to her ear. Thought you might appreciate it. The vague response was typical, but Sarah no longer found it frustrating. There was something freeing about not knowing, about trusting the journey without demanding its destination. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills. When Stone finally brought thunder to a halt, they had reached a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. In the center stood the remains of a cabin, its roof partially collapsed, but its stone chimney still reaching skyward. What is this place? Sarah asked as Stone helped her dismount. Was someone's dream once, he said, leading her toward the abandoned structure. Homesteader's cabin built maybe 15 years ago. Family tried to make it work, but the land's too rocky for good farming. Sarah approached the cabin carefully, mindful of loose boards and protruding nails. Moonlight streamed through the damaged roof, illuminating what remained of a simple life. A broken chair, shelves built into the walls, a stone hearth blackened from long extinguished fires. It's sad, she said softly. Someone's hope abandoned. Stone's voice came from behind her, unexpectedly gentle. That's one way to see it. Or it could be a new beginning, waiting for the right hands. Sarah turned to find him closer than she'd realized, his expression softened by moonlight and shadow. You think it could be saved? Roof needs replacing. Floor's solid, though. Good foundation. He gestured to the surrounding clearing. Land's not right for crops, but good for raising horses. Protected from the worst winds. Water source nearby. Sarah studied him, understanding dawning. You're thinking of claiming it, making it yours. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her perception. Been considering it. Is that why you brought me here, to show me your future home? Stone was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Wanted to see it through your eyes. Know if you could picture it too. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Sarah's breath caught her heart suddenly racing. Stone wasn't just showing her a cabin. He was showing her a possibility, a future that might include her. She began, then faltered, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn. Stone, we barely know each other. Know enough, he countered, echoing his words from their first meeting. Know you're strong even when you think you're broken. Know you care about others. That Wilson girl, her mother, know you see beauty in small things. He gestured to the star he had carved, which Sarah now wore on a ribbon around her neck. That's not enough to build a life on, she protested, though something within her yearned toward the vision he offered. A home, a purpose beyond the schoolroom, a partner in the truest sense. Might be a better foundation than most, Stone said simply. Better than pretty words and empty promises. The reference to her past was indirect but clear. Sarah had shared little about James during their brief conversations, but Stone had somehow understood the nature of her wounds. "I'm not asking for an answer," he continued, taking a step back as if to reassure her. "Just wanted you to see the possibility." Relief and disappointment mingled in Sarah's chest. Relief that he wasn't pressing for commitment, disappointment that he hadn't. The contradiction confused her, a reminder of how unprepared she was for whatever was growing between them. "It's a beautiful spot," she said, finally glancing around the moonlit clearing. "Peaceful." Stone nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. "Come on, one more thing to show you." He led her away from the cabin through a stand of pines to where the land opened up to reveal a natural pool fed by a small waterfall. The moon's reflection danced on the dark surface stars mirrored in its depths. "Oh," Sarah breathed, captivated by the unexpected beauty. "It's magical." "Spring-fed," Stone said, practical as always. "Runs year-round, even in drought. Good for livestock, good for drinking." But his eyes weren't on the water, they were on her face, watching her reaction with an intensity that made her skin warm despite the cool night air. "You see things differently than most," Sarah observed, meeting his gaze. "You notice what others miss." A shadow crossed his features. Had to learn to read the land, read people. Survival. There it was again, that hint of a darker past of experiences that had shaped him into the solitary, watchful man before her. Sarah wanted to ask to understand the story behind the scar on his jaw, the wariness in his eyes, the calluses on his hands that spoke of more than ranch work. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. Stone remained perfectly still, his breathing the only indication that her proximity affected him. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly, "for showing me possibilities." His eyes never left hers, midnight blue in the darkness. "Always possibilities, Sarah. Just got to be willing to see them." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken words and unfulfilled gestures. Sarah knew if she moved even slightly closer, something would change irrevocably. She wasn't ready, not yet, not with so many questions unanswered, so many fears unresolved. She stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should head back. It's getting late." If Stone was disappointed, he didn't show it. He simply nodded, offering his hand to help her navigate the uneven ground back to where Thunder waited. The return journey passed in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the horse carried them steadily back towards Silverwind. When they reached the schoolhouse, Stone dismounted first, then reached up to help Sarah down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Sleep well, Sarah Bennett," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt more than heard. "Good night, Stone," she replied reluctantly, stepping away from his warmth. He waited until she was safely inside before mounting Thunder and disappearing into the night as he always did. Sarah watched from the window the wooden star, a comforting weight against her collarbone, a tangible reminder of possibilities not yet embraced, but increasingly difficult to deny. The first snowfall came early to Silverwind, blanketing the plains in crystalline white overnight. Sarah woke to a transformed world, the familiar landscape rendered new and strange beneath its frozen cloak. The schoolroom windows, frosted at the edges, tiny ice flowers blooming across the glass. Snow. The children's excitement was palpable as they burst through the doors, cheeks flushed from the cold voices raised in gleeful chaos. "Miss Bennett, can we play outside just for a little while?" Sarah laughed, caught up in their enthusiasm. "After arithmetic, if the sun stays out. Now take your seats and shake the snow from your boots." They settled reluctantly, eyes straying to the windows, where snowflakes still drifted lazily past. Sarah understood their distraction. The first snow held magic possibilities suspended in each falling crystal. "Today we'll learn how to calculate the area of a circle." She began drawing a perfect round shape on the blackboard. "Can anyone tell me why this might be useful knowledge?" To her surprise, Emma's hand shot up, confidence replacing her usual hesitation. "For measuring water in a well. My pa used to say you need to know how much water is in the circle before you can know how much you can take." An excellent practical application. "Emma," Sarah smiled, pleased by the girl's growing willingness to participate. In the weeks since their after-school sessions had begun, Emma had blossomed her natural intelligence, finding expression in thoughtful questions and careful observations. From the back of the room, Thomas Jenkins snorted. "What does a girl need to know about wells for? Not like she'll ever dig one." Several boys snickered, but Sarah noticed a change. Emma didn't shrink into herself as she once would have. Instead, the small girl turned in her seat, her voice surprisingly steady. My pa dug 3 wells in his life, and he taught me how. I may not have the strength yet, but I have the knowledge. The simple statement, delivered without anger, but with quiet dignity, silenced the laughter more effectively than any reprimand from Sarah could have. Thomas's face reddened, whether from embarrassment or anger, she couldn't tell, but he didn't respond. Sarah felt a surge of pride in Emma's quiet courage. Knowledge is never wasted, she said, addressing the entire class but smiling at Emma, whether we use it immediately or save it for future need. The lesson continued, the children's attention divided between mathematics and the swirling snow outside. When Sarah finally dismissed them for a brief recess, they erupted from the schoolhouse in a flurry of coats and scarves, their voices carrying across the snow-covered schoolyard. Sarah wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, watching as snowballs flew and snow angels appeared in the pristine white. Her gaze drifted to the edge of town where Stone's tall figure had become a familiar sight. She hadn't seen him in 3 days, the longest absence since their nighttime ride to the abandoned cabin. The memory of that evening still unsettled her. Not because of anything Stone had done or said, but because of her own response to it. The possibility he had shown her, a life beyond the schoolhouse, a future that included him, had taken root in her thoughts, growing despite her attempts to remain practical and detached. "Miss Bennett," Emma's voice pulled Sarah from her reverie. "Look what I found." The girl approached, carefully cradling something in her mittened hands. When she opened them, Sarah saw a bird's nest, perfectly preserved, its intricate weave of twigs and grass, a testament to natural craftsmanship. "It was in the bush by the steps," Emma explained. "The snow knocked it down, but it's not broken." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, gently touching the edge of the nest. "A home abandoned for the winter, but perfectly made. Do you think the birds will come back in spring?" "Perhaps, or they might build a new one." Sarah studied the delicate structure. Birds are remarkable builders. They instinctively know how to create exactly what they need. Emma's eyes were thoughtful. "Like Mr. Rivers with the cabin." Sarah startled, uncertain how Emma knew about Stone's plans for the abandoned homestead. "What do you mean?" "I heard him talking to Mr. Peterson at the general store," Emma explained, "about lumber for a roof. He said he was fixing up the old Taylor place." News traveled quickly in small towns, but Sarah was surprised that Stone had spoken openly about his intentions. He was typically private, sharing little with anyone save her. "Mr. Rivers is very skilled with his hands," Sarah said, carefully aware of the children playing nearby. "I'm sure he'll make the cabin sturdy and sound." Emma nodded solemnly. "He left another basket for Ma last night. She still thinks it's from the church ladies, but I saw him. He put it on our step and then walked away, real quiet." The confirmation of Sarah's suspicion that Stone was behind the mysterious aide appearing at the Wilsons' door warmed her heart. She had suspected as much, but had never asked him directly, sensing he preferred his kindness to remain anonymous. "Sometimes people wanted to help without recognition, Emma. It's a special kind of generosity." "Why would he help us?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed. "Ma says we don't know him hardly at all." Sarah considered how to answer. "Perhaps he recognizes something in you and your mother. Courage, persistence. Those are qualities Mr. Rivers respects." Emma seemed to accept this, turning the nest over in her hands. "Can I keep this in the classroom for studying?" "Of course, we'll put it on the nature table." The girl beamed, carefully carrying her treasure inside. Sarah remained on the porch, her gaze returning to the edge of town where Stone usually appeared. The snow continued to fall, erasing tracks and softening edges, transforming the familiar into something new and full of possibility. The snow lasted 3 days, melting on the 4th when warmer winds blew in from the west. Stone appeared that evening, his familiar silhouette at the schoolyard's edge, a welcome sight after his unexplained absence. Sarah was alone, having sent Emma home early, when Margaret had sent word she was feeling stronger. She was arranging books on the shelves when she heard his distinctive tread on the steps. "Beginning to think the snow had driven you away," she said without turning, smiling at her ability to recognize him by his footsteps alone. "Takes more than snow to scare me off." His voice was rougher than usual, edged with something she couldn't identify. Sarah turned then, her smile fading as she saw him clearly. A dark bruise marked his left cheekbone, and he held himself stiffly, favoring his right side. "Stone, what happened?" She moved toward him instinctively, concern overriding propriety. He shrugged, then winced at the movement. Disagreement with a stallion. Horse won the first round. Sarah didn't believe him for a moment. The injury to his face wasn't the kind made by a horse. It was the distinct mark of a fist. But she recognized the deflection for what it was, an unwillingness to explain further. "Sit down," she said instead, gesturing to a chair. "Let me look at that cut." Surprisingly, he complied, lowering himself carefully into one of the larger chairs kept for parent meetings. Sarah fetched the small medical kit she maintained for schoolyard injuries, wetting a clean cloth with water from the pitcher. "This may sting," she warned, approaching him with the cloth. Stone remained perfectly still as she cleaned the cut above his eye, his only reaction a slight tightening of his jaw. This close, Sarah could see other marks, older scars nearly hidden by his beard, a healed split in his eyebrow, the ridge of a once broken nose. A man accustomed to violence, either giving or receiving. "Want to tell me what really happened?" she asked quietly, applying witch hazel to the bruise. His eyes met hers, midnight blue and unreadable. "Better if I don't." The simple answer confirmed her suspicion. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a simple accident with a horse. But she didn't press, recognizing the boundaries he maintained around certain aspects of his life. "Hold still," she murmured, reaching for a small jar of salve. Her fingers brushed his cheek as she applied it, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through her hand. Stone remained motionless, but she felt his eyes on her face, watching her with that intense focus that always made her feel both exposed and understood. "There," she said, stepping back when she'd finished. "Not much I can do about the bruise, but the cut should heal clean." "Thank you." The words were simple but genuine, his voice softer than usual. Sarah began returning items to the medical kit, using the activity to gather her thoughts. "Emma told me about the baskets." Stone's expression didn't change, but a wariness entered his eyes. "Don't know what you mean." "The food and supplies you've been leaving for the Wilsons." Sarah closed the kit, meeting his gaze directly. "It's a kindness, Stone. You don't need to hide it." He looked away, uncomfortable with her acknowledgement. "They needed help, nothing more to it." "Why them specifically?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "There are other families in need in Silverwind." Stone was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "She reminds me of someone. The girl." The admission seemed to cost him something, as if he'd revealed more than he intended. Sarah didn't respond immediately, sensing that whatever memory Emma had triggered was painful. "She told me you were fixing up the Taylor cabin," she said instead, giving him space to retreat from the revelation. Stone nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders at the change of subject. "Got lumber delivered yesterday. Roof first, then the windows. It's a big project for one man. Got time." He shifted, wincing again at the movement. "Been thinking about what you said, about it being someone's abandoned hope." Sarah smiled, remembering their conversation. "And you're giving it new life." "Something like that." His eyes found hers again, the intensity returning. "Rode out this morning to check the boundaries. Land's bigger than I thought. Stretches all the way to the creek on the north side." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, genuinely pleased for him. "You'll have water for horses just as you wanted. Plenty of space, too." He hesitated, then added, "Space enough for more than horses." The implication hung between them, unmistakable yet unspoken. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, aware that they were approaching territory she had carefully avoided since their last visit to the cabin. "Stone," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. A commotion outside interrupted her. Voices raised in alarm, the pounding of running feet on packed earth. Stone was on his feet instantly, his injuries forgotten, as he moved to the window. "Fire," he said tersely, already striding toward the door. "At the east end of town." Sarah followed him outside, her heart dropping as she saw the column of smoke rising against the evening sky. The East End, where the Wilsons lived. Without a word, Stone broke into a run, his long legs carrying him swiftly down the street. Sarah gathered her skirts and followed, fear lending speed to her steps. Around them, townspeople emerged from homes and businesses, pointing and calling out as they saw the smoke. By the time Sarah reached the Wilson cabin, a crowd had gathered. Flames engulfed the small structure, orange and hungry against the darkening sky. Sheriff Jenkins was attempting to organize a bucket line from the nearby well, his voice rising above the crackling fire and the crowd's shouts. "Emma," Sarah called, scanning the faces for the familiar blonde braids. Emma, Margaret Wilson, sat on a wooden crate some distance from the burning cabin, a blanket around her shoulders, her face streaked with tears and soot. Sarah rushed to her, kneeling beside the distraught woman. "Margaret, where is Emma?" "I don't know," Margaret sobbed, clutching Sarah's arm. "She went to gather kindling before supper. She should have been back. I thought she was with you. The fire started so fast." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "She's not with me. I sent her home early when I got your message." "Message?" Margaret's confusion was evident through her tears. "I didn't send any message." Before Sarah could process this alarming information, a shout went up from the crowd. "There's someone inside!" Stone's voice cut through the chaos. "Get back!" He pushed through the onlookers, shrugging off his coat as he approached the burning structure. "Rivers, don't be a fool," Sheriff Jenkins called. "That roof's about to collapse." But Stone was already moving, tying a wet bandana over his nose and mouth before plunging through the door in a single powerful motion. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the roar of flames consuming wood and fabric and memory. Sarah couldn't breathe, her chest tight with fear, as seconds stretched into an eternity. Margaret's grip on her arm was painful, the woman's prayers a desperate whisper beside her. Then Stone emerged, bent low, a small figure clutched against his chest. His shirt smoldered, his face blackened with soot, but his arms held Emma securely as he staggered away from the collapsing structure. "Emma." Margaret's cry tore from her throat as she tried to rise. Sarah helped her to her feet, supporting her as they rushed to where Stone had lowered Emma to the ground. The girl was unconscious, her face smudged with soot, but Sarah could see the rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing. Dr. Simmons pushed through the crowd, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "Give her air," he commanded, kneeling beside Emma. "And get that man some water." Stone stood a few paces away, coughing violently, waving off attempts to assist him. His eyes never left Emma as the doctor examined her, his expression a mixture of concern and something darker. Anger or suspicion, Sarah couldn't tell which. "She'll be all right," Dr. Simmons announced after a tense examination. "Smoke inhalation, a few minor burns, but nothing life-threatening. She's a lucky child." Margaret collapsed to her knees beside her daughter, weeping with relief. Around them, the bucket line continued its futile work, but it was clear the cabin was beyond saving. Everything the Wilsons owned was being reduced to ash before their eyes. Sarah approached Stone, who had finally accepted a dipper of water from a concerned townsperson. "You saved her life," she said softly, touching his arm. "You could have been killed." He shook his head, still coughing intermittently. "Wasn't right," he managed between coughs. "Fire started, wrong place." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Sheriff Jenkins joined them, his expression troubled. "Rivers," he acknowledged with a nod. "Brave thing you did there." Stone merely grunted, his attention still on Emma, who was beginning to stir under the doctor's care. "Thing is," Jenkins continued, "fire like this, starting so fast with no one home, makes a man wonder." "Are you suggesting it wasn't an accident?" Sarah asked, horrified by the implication. The sheriff tugged at his mustache, uncomfortable. "Considering the circumstances had to cross my mind." "What circumstances?" Sarah demanded. Jenkins glanced at Stone, then back to Sarah. "No secret the Wilson girl's been spending time with you, Miss Bennett, or that you've been friendly with Mr. Rivers here. Some might see connections." "That's absurd," Sarah said, anger rising. "Who would harm a child and a widow over something so trivial?" "Not saying it makes sense," Jenkins held up his hands. "Just saying it's peculiar timing is all." Stone's voice was rough but controlled when he finally spoke. "Fire started at the back wall. Not the stove, not the hearth. Someone wanted it to look like an accident." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You seem to know a lot about fires, Rivers." "Seen enough to know the difference between accident and intent." Stone's gaze was steady, challenging. "Question is, why aren't you more concerned about finding who did this?" An uncomfortable silence fell between the men, broken only when Emma's voice rose weakly from where she lay. "Mr. Rivers," Stone moved past the sheriff without another word, kneeling beside Emma with a gentleness that belied his size. "I'm here, little one." Emma's soot-streaked face crumpled. "They took my nest, the bird's nest. They said it was because I talked to you." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She knelt beside Stone, taking Emma's small hand in hers. Who, Emma? Who took your nest? The girl's eyes filled with tears. Don't know. They put a bag over my head. Said if I had told they'd hurt Margaret gasped, pulling her daughter closer. Oh, my poor child, my baby. Stone rose to his feet, his expression thunderous. Without a word, he strode to where Sheriff Jenkins stood, conferring with his deputy. Still think this was an accident? Stone's voice carried across the diminishing crowd, causing heads to turn. Jenkins flushed either from embarrassment or anger. Now see here, Rivers. Girl was taken, threatened, cabin deliberately burned. Stone's words fell like hammer blows. What are you going to do about it? The sheriff's straightened hand moving to rest on his holstered gun in an unconscious gesture of authority. I'll handle this investigation my way, Rivers. Don't need outsiders telling me how to do my job. Then do it, Stone growled, taking a step closer, instead of standing around watching a widow's home burn to the ground. For a tense moment, Sarah thought the confrontation might escalate further, but Jenkins merely adjusted his hat, his expression closed. We'll discuss this tomorrow when heads are cooler. In the meantime, the Wilsons need a place to stay. The immediate problem deflated some of the tension. Several townspeople stepped forward, offering temporary accommodation, but it was Reverend Porter who settled the matter. The church has a small room behind the vestry, he said, his gentle voice a contrast to the heated exchange. It's warm with a bed and a cot. Margaret and Emma would be welcome to stay as long as needed. With the immediate crisis addressed, the crowd began to disperse. The cabin was now just a smoldering ruin black against the night sky. Sarah helped Margaret and Emma gather the few possessions that had been outside the house. A washtub, some tools, a clothesline of half-dried linens that had miraculously escaped the flames. Stone worked alongside her in silence, his movements efficient despite his obvious pain from the earlier injuries and new burns. When everything salvageable had been collected, he approached Margaret, speaking too quietly for Sarah to hear. The widow nodded, tears filling her eyes again, as she briefly clasped his hand in thanks. The doctor insisted on taking Emma and Margaret to his office first to treat their minor injuries and ensure the smoke hadn't damaged Emma's lungs. Sarah walked with them, promising to help settle them in the church room afterward. I'll be along shortly, she told Emma, squeezing the girl's hand. Try to rest. When they had gone, Sarah found Stone standing before the ruins of the cabin, his expression unreadable in the fading light. You're injured, she said softly, noting the fresh burns on his hands and arms. You should let the doctor look at you. Had worse. His voice was distant, his attention still on the smoldering remains. You don't believe this was an accident? Stone turned to her, then his eyes hard. No, and neither do you. Sarah nodded, her earlier fear giving way to anger. Emma said they mentioned you, that she was punished for talking to you. What does that mean, Stone? Who would do this? A muscle worked in his jaw, tension radiating from his powerful frame. Someone sending a message. To you or to me? Both, maybe. He ran a hand over his face, leaving a smear of soot across his forehead. Sarah, there are things you don't know about me. Then tell me, she said simply, her patience worn thin by fear and worry. Whatever it is, Stone, I need to know, especially if it's putting Emma and others in danger. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the burned cabin. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, each word seeming to cost him something vital. I was married once, The revelation wasn't what Sarah had expected, and she struggled to understand its relevance to the current situation. I don't see had a daughter too. Stone continued as if she hadn't spoken, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Beth, she'd be about Emma's age now. Understanding began to dawn, pieces falling into place. His interest in Emma, the anonymous gifts, his immediate action when the fire was discovered. What happened to them? Sarah asked gently. Stone's face hardened, grief and rage mingling in his features. Fire, like this one. No accident, though they tried to make it look that way. Sarah's heart contracted. Oh, Stone. Was a witness in a case against a cattle baron. Man named Harlan Crawford. Testified about land fraud intimidation of smaller ranchers. His voice was flat and emotionless, as if reciting facts about a stranger. Night before the verdict, our cabin burned. Rebecca and Beth inside. The horror of it stole Sarah's breath. And you think, tonight, It's connected somehow. Stone shook his head. Crawford's dead, shot 2 years ago in a dispute over water rights. He turned to her, his eyes haunted. But when I saw the flames, heard the girl was missing, it all came back. Sarah reached for his hand, ignoring the soot and blisters. I'm so sorry, Stone. He allowed the contact briefly before withdrawing, uncomfortable with sympathy. Point is, I know a deliberate fire when I see one. And I know threats disguised as accidents. Someone sending a warning. But why would have Emma and Margaret done to deserve this? Nothing, they're just convenient targets. Stone's expression darkened. Way to get at you, maybe. Or me. The implications chilled Sarah. If someone had targeted the Wilsons as a way to threaten her or Stone, the guilt was overwhelming. We need to tell Sheriff Jenkins everything. Stone's laugh was harsh without humor. Jenkins won't help. Man's useless at best, corrupt at worst. He's still the law in Silverwind, Sarah insisted, and he deserves the chance to do his job before we accuse him of neglecting it. Stone studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Tomorrow, then, we'll talk to him together. The compromise satisfied Sarah for the moment. I should go help Margaret and Emma get settled, and you need to have those burns treated. I'll walk you to the doctor's office. Stone's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a statement of fact. As they made their way through the darkened streets, Sarah was acutely aware of eyes watching from windows of conversations that halted as they passed. The events of the evening had undoubtedly fueled the town's speculation about her relationship with Stone. Speculation that now carried darker undertones in light of the fire. People are talking, she murmured. Let them. Stone's response was immediate and dismissive. Words don't burn homes or threaten children. His certainty was comforting, in its way his perspective unclouded by concerns about reputation or propriety. It was one of the things Sarah had come to value about him, his ability to see through social pretenses to the heart of what mattered. At the doctor's office, Emma was already asleep on a cot, exhaustion having claimed her, despite the evening's trauma. Margaret sat beside her, her own face gray with fatigue. The Reverend is preparing the room, Dr. Simmons informed them. They can stay here until it's ready. I'll help them settle in, Sarah assured him, then turned to Stone. Let the doctor look at those burns now. Stone hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of medical attention, but finally acquiesced with a nod. As he followed the doctor to the examination area, Sarah heard him ask in a low voice, the girl, any sign of other injuries? Anything that might have happened before the fire? The question sent a chill through Sarah. Stone wasn't just concerned about the fire itself, but what might have happened to Emma while she was in her captor's hands. The thought was too horrible to contemplate. Margaret roused slightly as Sarah sat beside her. Miss Bennett, she whispered, careful not to wake Emma. That man, Mr. Rivers, he went into the fire for my daughter. Yes, Sarah confirmed, without hesitation. Why? Margaret's eyes were confused, seeking understanding. We're nothing to him. Sarah chose her words carefully. Stone lost his family in a similar fire years ago, his wife and daughter. Comprehension dawned in Margaret's tired face. The baskets, the help, it was him all along, wasn't it? Sarah nodded. He sees something of his own child in Emma, I think. Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears. How does a man survive such loss? I don't know, Sarah admitted, but I think helping others, helping Emma, is part of his way forward. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds Emma's soft breathing and the murmur of voices from the examination room. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice barely audible. Sheriff Jenkins suggested that perhaps your association with Mr. Rivers might have contributed to our situation. The statement hung in the air, neither accusation nor question, but weighted with implication. Sarah felt a stab of guilt, wondering if there was truth in it. I don't know why anyone would target you and Emma, she said honestly. But if my friendship with Stone has somehow placed you in danger, I am deeply sorry. Margaret shook her head slightly. I didn't mean, that is, I don't blame you, Miss Bennett. You've been nothing but kind to us. She paused, gathering her thoughts. It's just that Silverwind has always had its secrets, its divisions, those with power, those without. Perhaps Mr. Rivers has stepped on the wrong toes. The assessment was surprisingly astute coming from the quiet widow. Sarah considered Margaret's words, wondering what toes Stone might have stepped on, and whether her own actions had contributed to tonight's violence. Further conversation was interrupted by the return of Dr. Simmons and Stone, the latter's burns now properly cleaned and bandaged. He looked less imposing with white gauze wrapped around his hands and forearms, but no less determined. Reverend Porter says the room is ready, the doctor announced. I'll help carry Emma. I can do it, Stone said, his voice brooking no argument. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Carefully then, she needs rest more than anything. Stone approached the sleeping child with surprising gentleness, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Emma stirred but didn't wake instinctively, curling against his chest. Margaret watched with a mother's anxiety, but didn't protest as Stone carried her daughter out into the night. The small room behind the church vestry was simple but comfortable. A single bed, a cot, a table with a lamp, and a small stove for warmth. Reverend Porter had prepared it well with fresh linens and a pot of stew keeping warm on the stove. It's not much, the Reverend apologized, but you're welcome to stay as long as needed. It's more than enough, Margaret assured him, her dignity intact despite the night's losses. We're grateful for the church's kindness. Stone placed Emma on the cot, arranging the blankets around her with unexpected tenderness. When he straightened, Sarah caught a glimpse of raw emotion on his face before his usual stoic expression returned. I'll be close by tonight, he told Margaret. Any trouble, any at all, you call out. The widow nodded understanding in her tired eyes. Thank you, Mr. Rivers, for everything. Stone acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, then turned to Sarah. I'll see you home. It wasn't a request, and Sarah didn't treat it as one. After assuring Margaret that she would return in the morning to help sort through their salvaged possessions, she followed Stone out into the night. They walked in silence through the darkened town, the events of the evening settling heavily between them. When they reached the schoolhouse, Stone paused at the bottom of the steps, his gaze scanning the surroundings with newfound wariness. Check the locks tonight, he said. Windows, too. The concern in his voice sent a shiver through Sarah. Do you really think I might be in danger? Don't know. His honesty was both reassuring and frightening, but better cautious than sorry. Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. What will you do now? Keep watch for a while, make sure the Wilsons are safe. He hesitated, then added, tomorrow I'll start asking questions. Someone in this town knows something. We'll go to Sheriff Jenkins first, Sarah reminded him. Give him a chance to investigate properly. Stone's expression suggested he had little faith in that approach, but he nodded in agreement. Get some rest, Sarah. Tomorrow will be long. He turned to go, but Sarah caught his arm, stopping him. Stone, what you told me earlier about your family. She trailed off, uncertain how to express what she felt. Doesn't change anything, he said roughly. It changes everything, she countered softly. It helps me understand you better. He was still for a moment, his face in shadow. Been alone a long time. Easier that way. Safer. And now, the question hung between them, layered with meanings neither was ready to fully articulate. Stone's eyes held hers in the darkness, searching. Now, I'm not so sure, he admitted finally. Not since I met you. The simple statement carried more weight than 1,000 flowery declarations. Sarah felt something shift between them, a deepening of whatever had been growing since that first night he had appeared in her classroom. Good night, Stone, she said softly, releasing his arm. He nodded once, his eyes still on her face. Good night, Sarah. She watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by darkness. Only when he had disappeared completely did she enter the schoolhouse, carefully checking each window and door as he had instructed. That night, Sarah dreamed of fire and falling stars, of a small cabin reborn from ashes, and of a grief-stricken man finding his way back to life, one act of kindness at a time. Morning brought a semblance of normalcy to Silverwind, though whispers followed Sarah as she made her way to the school. Several parents were waiting outside, their expressions ranging from concerned to suspicious. She braced herself for difficult questions. Miss Bennett, Mrs. Parker, the butcher's wife and mother to two of Sarah's students, stepped forward. We've been talking and we're concerned about recent events. Sarah straightened her spine, determined to remain professional. The fire at the Wilson home was a tragedy. I understand your concern. It's not just the fire, another parent interjected. It's your association with that drifter Rivers. He's brought trouble to our town. Mr. Rivers saved Emma Wilson's life last night, Sarah said evenly. at great risk to his own. And why was the child in danger in the first place? Mrs. Parker's voice sharpened. These things didn't happen before he started hanging around. Sarah felt her temper rising. Are you suggesting Mr. Rivers set the fire, the same fire he ran into to save Emma? The parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. We're not suggesting anything, Mrs. Parker said finally. We're just concerned about our children's safety and yours. I appreciate your concern, Sarah replied, keeping her voice calm with effort. But I assure you your children are perfectly safe in my care. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time for class to begin. She moved past them with as much dignity as she could muster, aware of their eyes on her back as she entered the schoolhouse. Inside, she leaned against the closed door for a moment, gathering her composure before the children arrived. The day passed in a haze of lessons and whispers. Thomas Jenkins was notably absent, as were several other children whose parents had been among the morning's delegation. Sarah tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for those who had come, but her mind kept returning to the burned cabin, to Emma's tearful revelation about her abductors, to Stone's haunted eyes as he spoke of his lost family. When the final bell rang, Sarah found herself both relieved and apprehensive. She had promised to meet Stone at the sheriff's office, a conversation she anticipated with mixed feelings. Part of her hoped Jenkins would take their concerns seriously, while another part feared Stone was right about the sheriff's indifference or worse, complicity. She was gathering her things when a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Not Stone's familiar heavy tread, but a lighter, more hesitant sound. Sarah opened the door to find Margaret Wilson standing on the steps, her face pale but composed. Margaret, I was planning to come see you and Emma after meeting with the sheriff. How is she resting? Margaret twisted her hands together. Doctor, Simmons gave her something to help her sleep. The burns are minor, but the fright... She trailed off, her eyes filling with unshed tears. Come in, Sarah urged, guiding the woman to a chair. Can I get you some tea? Margaret shook her head. I can't stay long. I needed to tell you something about last night. Sarah sat beside her, concern growing at Margaret's obvious distress. What is it? After you left when Emma was sleeping, Sheriff Jenkins came to the church. Margaret's voice dropped to near a whisper. He said I should be careful about the company Emma keeps, that associating with you and especially with Mr. Rivers could bring more trouble. Anger flared in Sarah's chest. He said that after what happened. Margaret nodded, her eyes downcast. He mentioned that Mr. Rivers has a history, that he's not what he seems. What kind of history? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite her rising indignation. He wouldn't say exactly. Just that Mr. Rivers has enemies, dangerous ones, and that his presence in Silverwind puts us all at risk. Margaret looked up, her expression troubled. Miss Bennett, I'm grateful for all you've done for Emma, truly I am. And Mr. Rivers saved my daughter's life, but I have to think of her safety. Understanding dawned cold and heavy in Sarah's chest. You want Emma to stop attending our after-school sessions? Margaret nodded miserably. Just until things settle. Until we know who did this and why. Part of Sarah wanted to argue to defend Stone and refute whatever insinuations Jenkins had made, but the larger part understood Margaret's fear, her desperate need to protect her child from further harm. Of course, she said instead, reaching to clasp Margaret's hand. Emma's safety must come first. But Margaret, please don't believe everything you hear about Stone. Mr. Rivers, he's a good man who has suffered his own terrible losses. I know. Margaret's voice was soft. I saw how he was with Emma, how gentle despite his size and rough manner. But fear is a powerful thing, Miss Bennett, and right now I'm very afraid. The admission, simple and honest, silenced any further defense Sarah might have made. Instead, she squeezed Margaret's hand. I understand. When Emma is ready to return to our sessions, she'll be welcome. In the meantime, please tell her I'll keep her bird's nest safe for her. Relief softened Margaret's tired features. Thank you for understanding. I should get back to her now. Sarah walked her to the door, watching as she made her way back toward the church. The conversation left her troubled, wondering what exactly Sheriff Jenkins had told Margaret about Stone and why. She didn't have long to wait for answers. Stone arrived as the afternoon shadows lengthened, his expression grim. Jenkins wasn't at his office, he said without preamble. Deputy says he rode out to the Crawford Ranch early this morning. Sarah frowned, the name registering from their conversation the previous night. Crawford, but you said the man who... The cattle baron. He's dead. Harlan Crawford is dead, Stone confirmed. His son Ethan runs the ranch now. Interesting choice for the sheriff's attention, given recent events. The implication was clear in Stone's tone. You think the Crawfords might be involved in what happened to the Wilsons? Stone's eyes were hard. I think it's a hell of a coincidence that the sheriff's visiting them instead of investigating a crime in his own town. Sarah hesitated, then shared Margaret's visit. Jenkins has been warning people away from you, suggesting you have enemies and a history that puts others at risk. A muscle worked in Stone's jaw, anger evident in the tension of his shoulders. Not surprised. Easier to blame the outsider than look at the rot in his own backyard. Stone, what exactly is your history with the Crawfords beyond what you told me about the fire? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. After Rebecca and Beth died, I went a little mad. Tracked Harlan Crawford for months. Wanted justice or revenge. Couldn't tell the difference anymore. Did you kill him? Sarah asked directly, needing to know the truth. Stone's eyes met hers, clear and unwavering. No. Came close, had him in my sights once. But in the end, I couldn't do it. Someone else got to him first. Dispute over water rights, like I said. Sarah believed him not just because she wanted to, but because the pain in his eyes spoke of justice denied rather than achieved. His son Ethan took over the ranch, Stone continued. Different from his father, in some ways worse in others. More careful about appearances, but just as ruthless underneath. And you think he might be behind what happened to the Wilsons? Why? Because of your presence in Silverwind? Stone shook his head. Maybe, or maybe it's simpler than that. The Crawford Ranch has been expanding, buying up smaller spreads, pushing out independent ranchers. The Taylor place I've been fixing, it borders Crawford land to the north. Understanding dawned. You think they want that property? It's strategic, controls access to the creek, best water source in the area. Stone's expression darkened. Crawfords have always taken what they wanted one way or another. The picture becoming clearer, Sarah connected the threads. So when you started rebuilding the cabin, claiming that land officially, might have stirred up old grievances, Stone acknowledged, but that doesn't explain targeting the Wilsons or Emma specifically. Unless it wasn't about the land at all, Sarah said slowly, a terrible suspicion forming. What if it was about you, about hurting you by proxy? Stone's eyes sharpened. Explain. Emma said her abductors mentioned you specifically, that she was being punished for talking to you. And you've been leaving supplies for them, showing special interest in Emma. Sarah's heart raced as the theory took shape. What if someone wanted to hurt you where you're most vulnerable, not physically, but emotionally, through someone you care about? The color drained from Stone's face. Like my daughter, he whispered. A child I tried to protect. If Ethan Crawford blames you for his father's downfall, even indirectly, he'd know exactly how to hurt me worst. Stone's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. By recreating the same nightmare. The theory was horrifying, but made a terrible kind of sense. If Ethan Crawford harbored resentment toward Stone for his role in Harlan Crawford's legal troubles, troubles that had tarnished the family name and perhaps contributed to the circumstances of his death, what better revenge than to echo the tragedy that had destroyed Stone's life? We need proof, Sarah said, her mind racing. Something to take to federal marshals since we can't trust Jenkins. Stone nodded grimly. I'll ride out to the Crawford Ranch tonight, see what I can learn. Alone, that's too dangerous. Sarah's protest was immediate and heartfelt. Got no choice. Can't risk anyone else getting hurt because of me. His eyes held hers, intense and determined. Already got the Wilsons caught in this. Won't let that happen to you too. Moan. No. The single word was final, brewing no argument. I started this by coming to Silverwind, by claiming that land. I'll finish it. Sarah recognized the resolve in his stance, the decision already made. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back. Something softened in his expression. I'll come back, Sarah. Got reasons to now. The simple statement carried more meaning than elaborate vows of devotion. Sarah nodded, acknowledging both his determination and his promise. I'll check on the Wilsons while you're gone, she said. Make sure they're safe. Stone reached out his bandaged hand gentle against her cheek. Thank you. The touch was brief but electric, a connection that spoke of growing feelings neither was ready to name. Sarah leaned into it for just a moment before Stone withdrew, straightening his shoulders as if preparing for battle. Be back by morning, he said. One way or another, this ends now. As she watched him stride away, Sarah was struck by the contradiction he embodied. A man capable of such tenderness, yet moving with the deadly purpose of a predator. She remembered his words from weeks ago. I'm claiming you tonight, little one. At the time she had found them presumptuous, even frightening. Now she understood they had been a promise, not of possession, but of protection. A vow from a man who had lost everything once and would not allow history to repeat itself while he had breath in his body. Sarah touched the wooden star she still wore around her neck, a talisman against the gathering darkness. Whatever came next, she knew with sudden clarity that she was no longer the woman who had arrived in Silverwind months ago, isolated, wounded, merely existing rather than living. Stone had changed that had reminded her what it meant to feel deeply, to care fiercely, to stand firmly against threats rather than retreating from them. Whether he returned by morning or not, that gift would remain. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the schoolhouse in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah found herself praying that he would return, that the promise in his touch, in his eyes, would have the chance to grow into something stronger than the shadows of the past. Night descended on Silverwind like a heavy curtain, stars piercing the darkness above, while shadows pooled in corners and alleyways below. Sarah paced the length of her small quarters behind the schoolhouse, unable to settle her mind, filled with images of Stone riding alone toward the Crawford ranch. Each creak of the wooden floors, each whisper of wind against the windows, set her nerves on edge. She had promised to check on the Wilsons, but a quick visit to the church earlier had revealed both Margaret and Emma sleeping soundly, watched over by Reverend Porter's wife. Better to let them rest, Sarah had decided, promising to return in the morning. Now, with nothing to occupy her but worry, she found herself drawn to the window again and again, staring out at the dark street as if she might conjure Stone's return through sheer force of will. This is foolish, she murmured to herself, turning away from the glass. He's a grown man who has survived far worse than a nighttime reconnaissance. Yet the knot of anxiety in her chest refused to loosen. The memory of Stone's face as he spoke of his lost family haunted her. The grief still raw despite the passage of years, the rage barely contained beneath his stoic exterior. What would he do if confronted with the man he believed responsible for the fire that had threatened Emma, the man connected to his own family's deaths? Would vengeance overpower reason? Sarah moved to her desk, lighting a second lamp against the gathering darkness. Perhaps work would distract her. Lesson plans for the coming week, assignments to grade the endless administrative tasks that kept a one-room schoolhouse functioning. She opened her ledger, forcing her attention to columns of attendance marks and curriculum notes. The knock when it came was so faint she nearly missed it. Not Stone's familiar heavy tread, but a lighter, almost hesitant tap. Sarah froze, pen suspended above paper, listening. It came again, Miaina, 3 quick soft raps against her back door. Caution warred with curiosity as she rose from her chair. Stone's warnings echoed in her mind, his insistence that she check locks and windows. Yet who would come to her back entrance at this hour seeking secrecy rather than announcing themselves at the front of the schoolhouse? Sarah moved quietly to the kitchen drawer where she kept the Derringer, its weight small but reassuring in her palm. With the gun concealed in the folds of her skirt, she approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Silence answered her, then a whispered, "Please, Miss Bennett. It's about Mr. Rivers." The voice was male, but young, a boy perhaps, or a young man. Not one she immediately recognized. Sarah hesitated, suspicion battling with concern at the mention of Stone. "What about Mr. Rivers?" she asked, not touching the latch. "He's in trouble, ma'am. Bad trouble at the Crawford place. Pa sent me to tell you." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Who is your father? Why would he send you to me?" "Name's Jacob Turner. Pa works at the Crawford ranch, but he ain't like the rest. Please, Miss Bennett, there ain't much time." The desperation in the boy's voice seemed genuine, but Sarah remained wary. She gripped the Derringer tighter. "I'm going to open the door, Jacob, but I want you to stay where you are. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Slowly, Sarah unbolted the door and opened it a crack, keeping her body shielded behind the solid wood. On her back step stood a thin boy of perhaps 16, his face smudged with dirt, clothes bearing the dust of a hard ride. His eyes were wide with what appeared to be genuine fear. "What's happened to Stone?" Sarah demanded, maintaining her cautious position. "They caught him sneaking around the north pasture," Jacob said in a rush. "Mr. Crawford's men. They took him to the old barn. Pa says—" The boy swallowed hard. "Pa says they're going to make an example of him. Something about settling old scores." Cold dread washed through Sarah. If the boy was telling the truth, Stone had walked into a trap, or perhaps had been expected all along. "Why would your father send you to me? Why not the sheriff?" Jacob's expression darkened. "Sheriff Jenkins is there, ma'am, watching, not stopping nothing." The confirmation of what Stone had suspected, Jenkins' complicity with the Crawfords, sent a fresh wave of fear through Sarah. If the law in Silverwind was corrupt, who could she turn to? "Please, Miss Bennett," Jacob urged. "Pa risked a lot sending me. Said you might be the only one who'd help." Sarah studied the boy's face, searching for signs of deception and finding only urgent fear. Making a decision, she opened the door wider. "Come in quickly." Jacob stepped inside, removing his hat and twisting it nervously in his hands. Up close, Sarah could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 14, with the gangly limbs of recent growth and eyes too old for his years. "Tell me everything," she said, setting the derringer on the table where the boy could see it, a reminder that she wasn't entirely defenseless. Jacob nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Pa's been with the Crawfords 15 years. Started with old Mr. Crawford, stayed on when Ethan took over. Never liked how they do business, but work's scarce and Pa's got us kids to feed." "What does this have to do with Stone, with Mr. Rivers?" "There's bad blood between Mr. Rivers and the Crawfords. Has been for years, since before old Mr. Crawford died." Jacob's words tumbled out in a rush. "When Mr. Rivers started fixing up that old cabin on Taylorland, Mr. Crawford got real interested, sent men to watch him. Then when Mr. Rivers started spending time with you and the Wilson girl—" "Emma," Sarah supplied the pieces falling into place. "Crawford targeted Emma to get at Stone." Jacob nodded miserably. Pa heard them planning it. Tried to warn Mr. Rivers without getting caught himself, but couldn't find a way. Then tonight, when Mr. Rivers rode onto Crawford land, the boy's voice cracked. "They were waiting for him, Miss Bennett, like they knew he was coming." Sarah's mind raced. If Jenkins had indeed gone to the Crawford ranch that morning, he could have warned Ethan Crawford about their suspicions about Stone's likely response. "How many men does Crawford have?" she asked, practical concerns overtaking her initial shock. "At the ranch, maybe 10 counting the regular hands, but only 4 or 5 who'd do the bad stuff." Jacob twisted his hat tighter. "They took Mr. Rivers to the old barn. That's where—" He trailed off, unwilling or unable to finish. "Where what, Jacob?" Sarah pressed, needing to understand the full danger. The boy met her eyes reluctantly. "Where they deal with problems, ma'am. Nobody who goes into that barn against their will comes out the same, if they come out at all." The implications sent ice through Sarah's veins. "We need help. The federal marshal in Cheyenne—" "Too far," Jacob interrupted. 2 days' ride at least. "And Mr. Rivers?" Again that telling hesitation. "Pa says they won't wait that long." Sarah forced herself to think clearly, despite the fear clouding her mind. "There must be someone in Silverwind we can trust. Someone who would stand against the Crawfords." Jacob shrugged helplessly. "Crawford money touches most folks in these parts one way or another. And those it doesn't touch, it scares." A memory surfaced. Stone's voice low and certain. "Been alone a long time. Easier that way. Safer." She understood now what he had meant, why he had kept himself apart from others. Not just grief, but the knowledge that connections could be weaponized against him. Yet he had reached out to her despite that risk. Had protected Emma, had begun to build something new from the ashes of his past. She wouldn't let that courage go unanswered. "What about your father?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Would he help?" Jacob hesitated. "Pa's cautious. Has to be with his kids depending on him, but—" The boy straightened slightly. Yeah, I reckon he would, if there was a plan." Sarah nodded, decision crystallizing. "Then we'll make a plan. But first I need to see for myself what we're facing." Alarm flashed across Jacob's young face. You can't go to the Crawford Ranch, Miss Bennett. It's too dangerous, especially for a woman alone. I won't be alone, Sarah said, already moving to retrieve her coat. You'll show me the way, Jacob, and your father will help us once we arrive. But I'm not asking you to fight, Sarah clarified, seeing his fear. Just to guide me. I need to see the layout, understand what we're facing before I can determine how to help Stone. Jacob looked torn between obedience and self-preservation. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. I can take you to where you can see the ranch without being seen. But if they catch us, they won't, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. When can we leave? Now would be best. Most of the hands will be eating supper or settling in for the night. Less eyes watching. Sarah considered this, then shook her head. We need more help first. Wait here. Before Jacob could protest, she slipped out the front door and into the quiet street. The church was only a few minutes' walk away, its windows glowing with lamplight despite the late hour. Sarah knocked softly on the side door away from the main sanctuary. Mrs. Porter answered, her kind face creased with concern at finding the schoolteacher on her doorstep after dark. Miss Bennett, is everything all right? I need to speak with Margaret Wilson, Sarah said, keeping her voice low. It's important. The minister's wife hesitated only briefly before nodding. She's just settled Emma for the night. I'll fetch her. While she waited, Sarah glanced up at the night sky, stars obscured now by gathering clouds. A storm approaching both literally and figuratively. The thought of Stone captive and in danger sent a fresh wave of determination through her. Whatever his past, whatever complications lay between them, she would not abandon him to face his enemies alone. Margaret appeared moments later, her face pale with worry. Miss Bennett, has something happened? Quickly, Sarah explained the situation, keeping her voice low enough that Emma, hopefully asleep inside, wouldn't hear. Margaret's expression grew increasingly troubled as the truth of the fire and Emma's abduction became clear. These men, they targeted my daughter to hurt Mr. Bill. Rivers' disbelief and anger warred in Margaret's voice. Why, what could Emma possibly have to do with their quarrel? They saw Stone's interest in her welfare, Sarah explained gently, his protection of you both. They used that connection to strike at him where he was most vulnerable. Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter. Because she reminds him of his own daughter, the one he lost. Sarah nodded, surprised that Margaret had made the connection. Yes, and now he's in danger, possibly because he tried to protect Emma from further harm. Understanding dawned in Margaret's tired eyes. You're going after him. That's why you're here. I need someone to know where I've gone in case... Sarah couldn't finish the thought. And I need to ask something of you, something difficult. Margaret straightened, a new resolve entering her posture. Name it. I need you to go to the general store. Wake Mr. Peterson if necessary. Tell him we need men willing to stand against the Crawfords. Tell him, Sarah took a deep breath. Tell him if he ever valued the business Stone has brought him or the improvements to the Taylor property that will bring more settlers to this area now, is the time to show it. You think he'll help, that anyone will. Sarah met Margaret's doubtful gaze squarely. I think people in this town have looked the other way too long. I think they know what the Crawfords are, but have been too afraid to act. Sometimes it just takes one person willing to stand up first. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll do it. For Emma. For what Mr. Rivers did for her. Thank you. Sarah squeezed the widow's hand. One more thing. If I'm not back by morning, send word to Federal Marshal Dawson in Cheyenne. Tell him everything. The gravity of this contingency plan wasn't lost on Margaret. Her grip tightened on Sarah's fingers. Be careful, Miss Bennett. Emma needs you. We both do. The simple acknowledgement of connection of the small community they had formed strengthened Sarah's resolve. I'll be back, she promised, with Stone. As she turned to go, Margaret called after her softly, Miss Bennett, I was wrong to pull Emma away from your lessons. Wrong to listen to the sheriff's insinuations. I see that now. Sarah smiled gently. There's nothing to forgive. You were protecting your daughter as any mother would. With that, she slipped back into the night, returning to where Jacob waited anxiously at the schoolhouse. The boy had found time to saddle Sarah's mare, a thoughtful initiative that spoke well of his character. Ready? He asked as she approached. Sarah nodded, securing her coat against the cooling night air. Let's go. They rode in silence, Jacob leading them away from the main road, almost immediately taking winding paths through scrubland and sparse forest. The moon appeared and disappeared behind racing clouds, casting shifting shadows across the landscape. Sarah felt as if they were moving through a dream reality, made fluid by darkness and fear. "How much further?" she whispered, after what seemed like hours. "Not far now," Jacob replied, his voice equally low. "We're approaching from the north, less patrolled than the main road." They crested a small rise, and suddenly the Crawford Ranch lay before them, spread across a valley like a small kingdom. Lamplight glowed from the windows of a large main house, while several outbuildings and corrals formed a rough semicircle around it. At the edge of the complex stood a large barn, separate from the others, a single light visible through its high windows. Jacob pointed to it without speaking. The old barn where Stone was being held. Sarah studied the layout, noting the positions of smaller buildings, the apparent bunkhouse where ranch hands would sleep, the corrals currently empty of horses. Her initial impression was one of organized efficiency, a profitable operation run with military precision. "There," Jacob whispered, pointing to a small cabin set apart from the main complex. "That's where Pa lives, if we can reach him without being seen." Sarah nodded, already calculating distances and lines of sight. The rain that had threatened earlier began to fall, light drops quickly becoming a steady shower. It would make their approach more difficult, but would also mask sounds and limit visibility for any guards. "The barn," she said quietly. "How many entrances?" "Main doors at the front, smaller door at the back. Usually locked, but Pa has a key." Jacob shifted nervously in his saddle. "Miss Bennett, I should warn you. Pa's willing to help, but he's got my brothers and sisters to think about. He can't be seen opposing Mr. Crawford directly." "I understand," Sarah assured him. "I won't ask him to risk more than he can afford." They left their horses, secured in a stand of trees, and approached the ranch on foot, using the increasing rain as cover. The mud pulled at Sarah's boots, her skirts growing heavy with water and dirt, but she pressed on, focused entirely on reaching Jacob's father without detection. Twice they froze as ranch hands hurried past, heads bowed against the rain, too concerned with reaching shelter to notice the figures huddled in shadows. By the time they reached the small cabin, Sarah was shivering, her hair plastered to her face, her determination the only warmth against the chill. Jacob knocked softly on the door. A pattern Sarah realized a family signal. It opened almost immediately, revealing a tall man with Jacob's same lean build, but with years of hard work etched into his weathered face. "Inside, quick," he urged, pulling them both through the door before closing and bolting it firmly. "Jacob, you fool boy, what are you thinking bringing her here?" "She insisted, Pa," Jacob defended himself. "Wouldn't take no for an answer." The elder Turner turned to Sarah, his expression a mixture of respect and exasperation. "Miss Bennett, I presume. Jacob told you about Rivers." "Yes," Sarah confirmed, pushing wet hair from her face. "Is he still alive?" Turner nodded grimly. "For now. Crawford's in no hurry. He's enjoying having Rivers at his mercy after all these years." "What exactly is their history?" Sarah asked, accepting the towel Turner offered to dry her face and hands. "I know about Stone's family, about the fire, but not the details." Turner glanced at his son, then back to Sarah. "Not a pretty story. Sure you want to hear it?" "I need to understand what we're facing," Sarah insisted. "The full truth." Turner sighed, gesturing for them to sit at a small table while he poured coffee from a pot keeping warm on the stove. "Rivers worked for Harlan Crawford years ago. Was his best man, foreman of the ranch, trusted with everything. They were almost like brothers, some said. This was unexpected. Sarah had assumed Stone and the elder Crawford had always been adversaries. "What happened?" "Crawford's wife happened," Turner said bluntly. "She took a liking to Rivers. Hard not to notice, she wasn't subtle about it. But Rivers was already married to Rebecca, had little Beth. He rebuffed Mrs. Crawford's advances." Sarah could imagine the scenario all too easily. Stone's principles, his loyalty to his family set against a powerful woman's wounded pride. "Mrs. Crawford didn't take rejection well," Turner continued. "Told her husband Rivers had forced himself on her. Harlan Crawford was many things, but he loved his wife, believed her without question. So he sought revenge," Sarah concluded, the pieces falling into place. Turner nodded solemnly. "Fired Rivers, publicly humiliated him. But that wasn't enough. Started making it impossible for Rivers to find work anywhere in the territory. Used his influence to turn people against him. And when that didn't break Stone, he went after his family, Sarah said, the horrific logic becoming clear. Can't prove it, Turner cautioned. But everyone knew. Fire that killed Rebecca and Beth Rivers wasn't no accident. Too convenient happening just after Rivers testified about Crawford's illegal land grabs. Sarah's heart ached for Stone for the compounded betrayals and losses he had suffered. And Ethan Crawford. What's his role in this? Ethan was 17 when it happened. Worshipped his father, believed every word against Rivers. Turner's face darkened. After Harlan died, Ethan took over with a vengeance. Expanded operations pushed out smaller ranchers. More careful than his father about appearances, but just as ruthless underneath. And now he has Stone, Sarah said, her fear for him growing with each revelation. Turner studied her with shrewd eyes. You care for him. Rivers. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Yes. Then you should know Crawford doesn't just want Rivers dead. He wants him broken first. Wants to finish what his father started. The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah forced herself to focus on practicalities rather than the horror it evoked. How many men are guarding him? 2 outside the barn. Jenkins is inside with the Crawford and Rivers. Turner's expression suggested what he thought of the sheriff's involvement. Crawford sent the other hands away. Doesn't want too many witnesses to whatever he's planning. Sarah nodded, calculating odds and options. And where do you stand in all this, Mr. Turner? The rancher met her gaze steadily. I stand with my family first, Miss Bennett. Always have. But I've worked for the Crawfords long enough to know the difference between loyalty and blind obedience. He glanced at his son, then back to Sarah. I'll help you get Rivers out. After that, you're on your own. Fair enough, Sarah agreed. Do you have a plan? Turner's mouth quirked in a half smile. As it happens, I do. But you ain't gonna like it. Show him. The rain had become a downpour by the time Sarah approached the old barn, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. Turner's plan was simple, but dangerous. Perhaps the only kind that could work under the circumstances. Sarah as the element no one would expect would create a distraction. Turner would use the confusion to get Stone out through the back door, for which he did indeed have a key. Jacob was positioned with the horses ready for a quick escape when Stone was free. What Turner hadn't told her until the last moment was the nature of the distraction she would provide. Crawford's got a weakness, he had explained, his voice low and urgent. His mother, the woman who lied about Rivers all those years ago. She died last winter, but Ethan keeps her room exactly as it was, visits it daily. Claims sometimes he can still feel her presence. You want me to, what, pretend to be her ghost? Sarah had asked incredulously. Turner had shaken his head. Nothing so dramatic. Just need you to get into the main house to her room on the 2nd floor. Make some noise, knock some things over. With this storm and Crawford's superstitious nature, it might be enough to draw him out of the barn. Jenkins too, if we're lucky. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Now crouched behind a water trough 30 yards from the main house, Sarah wondered if she had lost her mind agreeing to it. Breaking into the home of a man who had orchestrated Emma's abduction and Stone's capture, who might well have been responsible for the deaths of Stone's family, it was beyond reckless. Yet the alternative, doing nothing while Stone suffered whatever vengeance Ethan Crawford had planned, was unthinkable. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah made her move, darting from the trough to the shadow of a small shed, then to the back porch of the main house. Turner had told her the kitchen door would likely be unlocked. Ranch hands came and went at all hours, and Crawford was confident enough in his power to feel secure within his own home. Sure enough, the door yielded to her gentle pressure. Sarah slipped inside, finding herself in a large kitchen, cold and dark, save for the banked embers in the cook stove. She paused, listening for any sound of occupants, but heard only the drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Moving cautiously through the darkened house, Sarah located the main staircase Turner had described. Each step seemed to creak beneath her weight, despite her efforts to tread lightly. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched in both directions, lined with closed doors. 3rd door on the right, Turner had said. Used to be you could smell the perfume she wore even after she was gone. Sickly sweet like dying flowers. Sarah moved down the hall, counting doors, trying to ignore the growing sense that she was being watched. Portraits lined the walls. Generations of Crawfords, their stern faces seeming to follow her progress with painted eyes. The third door on the right was slightly ajar, a thin line of silver moonlight spilling from within. Sarah hesitated, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, how far from help if something went wrong. Then she thought of Stone captive and in pain and pushed the door open. The room beyond was like stepping into another era, frilly and feminine, dominated by a large four-poster bed draped in lace. A dressing table stood by the window, its surface crowded with perfume bottles and silverback brushes. Everything was meticulously maintained without a speck of dust, as if the room's occupant had just stepped out momentarily. Sarah moved to the center of the room, uncertain how best to create the distraction Turner needed. A flash of lightning illuminated the space, followed seconds later by a crash of thunder that rattled the windows. Perfect timing. The storm itself was providing cover for whatever noise she might make. Steeling herself, Sarah swept her arm across the dressing table, sending bottles and brushes clattering to the floor in a cacophony of breaking glass and clinking metal. She moved to a bookshelf next, pulling volumes down with deliberate carelessness, then upended a small writing desk, inkwell and all. The chaos she created was significant, surely enough to draw attention from anyone in the house. But would it reach the barn? Would it pull Crawford away from his revenge? Sarah paused, listening. Through the storm's fury, she thought she heard shouts, the sound of running feet. Had it worked, or had she merely alerted Crawford's men to an intruder? A new sound reached her, the unmistakable report of a gunshot muffled by distance and rain, but clear enough to send ice through her veins. Not part of the plan. Something had gone wrong. Sarah rushed to the window, peering through rain-streaked glass toward the old barn. In the dim light, she could make out figures moving, the flash of lanterns. More shouts, another gunshot. Without hesitation, Sarah ran from the room and down the stairs, caution abandoned in her desperate need to know what was happening, to help if she could. She burst from the house into the driving rain, her skirts heavy and hampering as she ran toward the barn. The scene that greeted her was chaos. The barn doors stood open, lantern lights spilling out to illuminate figures struggling in the mud. Sarah recognized Turner grappling with one of Crawford's men, while another lay motionless nearby. Of Stone and Crawford there was no sign. "Where are they?" she cried, reaching Turner's side as he finally subdued his opponent with a well-placed blow. "Inside." Turner gasped, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Jenkins pulled a gun. Crawford went mad, started talking about finishing what his father started. Sarah didn't wait to hear more, pushing past him into the barn. The interior was cavernous shadows dancing in the uneven light of hanging lanterns. The smell hit her first. Blood and fear, and something worse, something burning. Near the center of the space, three figures formed a grim tableau. Stone, barely recognizable, slumped against a wooden post, ropes binding him in place. His face was a mask of blood and bruises, his shirt torn to reveal similar damage to his torso. Before him stood Crawford, tall and well-dressed despite the late hour, his handsome features contorted with rage. Jenkins hovered nearby, his sheriff's badge catching the light as he shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Crawford!" Sarah's voice echoed in the cavernous space, drawing all eyes to her. Ethan Crawford turned slowly, his expression changing from rage to confusion to something like delighted disbelief. "Well, well, the school teacher, come to save your savage bone." His voice was cultured, educated, the voice of a man who had attended the finest school back east before returning to claim his patrimony. Sarah forced herself to look only at Crawford, not at Stone's broken form. If she allowed herself to fully register his condition, she feared her courage might fail. "This has gone far enough," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The federal marshal is already on his way. You can't murder a man and expect to escape consequences, no matter how powerful you think you are." Crawford laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Murder? This isn't murder, Miss Bennett. This is justice, long delayed but finally served." He gestured to Stone. "This man destroyed my family, corrupted my mother, turned my father into a laughingstock. Everything that followed, all of it, was his doing." "That's a lie." Stone's voice was barely recognizable, a rasp of pain and determination. "Sarah, get out of here." "Shut up," Crawford snarled, driving a fist into Stone's already battered ribs. "You don't get to speak, not anymore." Sarah flinched but held her ground. "Your mother lied, Mr. Crawford. She approached Stone not the other way around. And when he rejected her advances, she fabricated accusations that your father was too blind to question. Crawford went very still, his face draining of color. Who told you that filth? That's not what happened. It's the truth, Sarah insisted. Ask your men, the ones who were there. Ask Mr. Turner, who's worked for your family longer than you've been alive. Turner. Crawford's eyes narrowed dangerously. He helped you. He betrayed me. He chose truth over loyalty to a lie, Sarah countered. As your father should have done years ago. Crawford's hand moved to his belt, drawing a revolver with practiced ease. You know nothing about my father. Nothing about what this man did to us. Jenkins stirred uneasily. Ethan, maybe we should... Be quiet, Crawford snapped without looking at him. You've done enough damage already letting Rivers establish himself in Silverwind, letting him corrupt the community against me. His attention returned to Sarah, the gun unwavering in his hand. Did he tell you about the fire, Miss Bennett, about how my father died? Your father died in a dispute over water rights, Sarah said, confusion threading through her fear. Years after the fire that killed Stone's family. Crawford's laugh was harsh, edged with something like madness. Is that what he told you? Another lie. My father died by his own hand, Miss Bennett. Ate his gun one night after drinking himself into oblivion. Couldn't live with what he'd done, what I'd helped him do. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. What you helped him do? I was there that night at Rivers' cabin. Crawford's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if he were speaking from within a memory. Father said we were just going to frighten them, teach Rivers a lesson about crossing the Crawfords. But things escalated. Sarah felt sick understanding dawning. You helped set the fire that killed Rebecca and Beth. I didn't know they were inside. Crawford's composure cracked, his voice rising to a shout. Father said they'd be in town, that we'd just destroy his home, leaving him with nothing. But they came back early, and by then the fire was... He trailed off, the gun trembling slightly in his hand. You've been living with this all these years, Sarah said softly, pieces falling into place. Blaming Stone for your own guilt. He drove us to it, Crawford insisted, but the certainty had left his voice. If he hadn't testified against Father, if he hadn't rejected Mother, if he hadn't been a man of principle, Sarah finished for him. If he hadn't chosen right over wrong, truth over lies. Crawford's eyes darted between Sarah and Stone, the gun still trained on her. You don't understand. You can't. I was 17. I trusted my father. Believed in him. And now you know the truth, Sarah said. Have known it since your father's suicide. But instead of making amends, you've spent years compounding the original sin. For a moment, something like doubt crossed Crawford's features. Then his expression hardened again. Too late for amends. Too late for anything but finishing this. He turned back to Stone, raising the gun. Sarah moved without thinking, throwing herself forward to stand between them. Her back to Stone, facing Crawford directly. If you do this, she said, her voice remarkably calm, despite the terror coursing through her, you'll destroy yourself completely. There will be no coming back, no redemption. Is that what you want? To become worse than you believe your father was? Crawford's hand wavered, conflict evident in his face. Behind Sarah, Stone stirred. Sarah, don't do this. Not for me. Yes, for you, she replied without turning, her eyes still locked with Crawford's. And for Rebecca and Beth, for Emma Wilson and her mother, for all the people hurt by lies and revenge and the stubborn refusal to face truth. A sound at the barn door drew Crawford's attention momentarily, Turner returning Jacob behind him. In that instant of distraction, Jenkins made his move, lunging to grab Crawford's gun arm. Enough, Ethan, the sheriff grunted, struggling to control the younger man. Miss Bennett's right. This ends now. Crawford fought wildly, his face contorted with rage and desperation. You're with them after everything my family did for you. I've looked the other way too long, Jenkins admitted, managing to wrest the gun from Crawford's grasp. Told myself it wasn't my business that the Crawfords brought prosperity to Silverwind. But there are lines, Ethan, lines I won't cross, not anymore. Sarah didn't wait to see how the struggle would resolve. She turned to Stone, her hands already working at the ropes that bound him. He slumped forward as the bindings loosened, too weak to support himself. Sarah caught him as best she could, easing him to the ground. "Stone," she whispered, cradling his battered face between her palms. "Stay with me, please." His eyes opened with effort, focusing on her face. "Knew you'd come," he murmured. "Shouldn't have, but knew you would." Turner appeared at her side, helping to support Stone's considerable weight. "Need to get him to a doctor," he said grimly. "Crawford worked him over pretty good before you arrived." Together they managed to get Stone to his feet, his arms draped over their shoulders. Behind them, Jenkins had subdued Crawford, binding his wrists with rope, while the man alternated between threats and broken pleas. "Jacob's waiting with the horses," Turner said as they staggered toward the door. "Can you make it to Rivers?" Stone nodded weakly, each step clearly agony. "Been through worse." Outside, the rain had slackened to a gentle shower, the worst of the storm having passed. Jacob waited as promised, wide-eyed at the sight of Stone's condition, but steady as he helped them mount. Sarah insisted Stone ride with her, his larger frame supported by hers, as they set off into the night, leaving the Crawford Ranch and its long legacy of hatred behind. Dawn was breaking over Silverwind as they rode into town, pale light painting the buildings in shades of rose and gold. To Sarah's surprise, a small crowd had gathered in the main street. Peterson from the general store, Reverend Porter, Dr. Simmons, and several other townspeople. Margaret Wilson stood at the front, Emma beside her, both anxious and hopeful as they watched the approaching riders. "Margaret," Sarah called as they drew closer. "What's happening?" "We were waiting for you," Margaret explained, moving to help as Stone was carefully lowered from the horse. Word spread about what was happening at the Crawford Ranch. Mr. Peterson organized men to ride out after you, but then the storm hit. "You did this?" Sarah asked, turning to the storekeeper in surprise. Peterson looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Wasn't just me. Folks around here have known something wasn't right with the Crawfords for years. Just needed someone to take the first step." Simmons moved forward, his medical bag in hand. "Get him to my office quickly. Those injuries need immediate attention." As Stone was carried toward the doctor's building, Emma broke away from her mother's side, running to catch up with Sarah. "Miss Bennett, is Mr. Rivers going to be all right?" Sarah knelt to the girl's level, her own exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Dr. Simmons will take good care of him, Emma. Stone is very strong." Emma nodded solemnly. "I know, he saved me from the fire. Now you saved him." Her small face was serious as she added, "That's how family works, isn't it, saving each other?" The simple observation brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Yes, Emma, that's exactly how it works." She stayed with Stone through the long morning as Dr. Simmons cleaned and bandaged his wounds, said a broken rib stitched a deep cut above his eye. Stone drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes gripping Sarah's hand with surprising strength, sometimes so still she feared the worst. "He'll live," Dr. Simmons assured her as he finished his work. "He's lost blood, and those ribs will take weeks to heal properly, but there's no internal damage that I can detect. What he needs now is rest and care." "I'll provide both," Sarah said firmly, brushing a strand of hair from Stone's forehead. The doctor eyed her with a mixture of professional concern and personal understanding. "You need rest too, Miss Bennett. You've had quite an ordeal yourself." Sarah shook her head. "I'll rest when he wakes, when I know he's truly all right." Dr. Simmons didn't argue further, merely patted her shoulder before leaving to attend to his other patients. Sarah settled more comfortably in the chair beside Stone's bed, her hand still entwined with his, and allowed herself to truly feel the events of the night. The fear, the courage, the revelations that had changed everything. Crawford's confession haunted her. Not just the horror of his involvement in the fire that had killed Stone's family, but the years of guilt and misdirected blame that had followed. She wondered if Stone had heard, if he had been conscious enough to understand that the truth of that night had finally come to light. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, Stone was watching her, his eyes open and lucid despite the bruising that surrounded them. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough but stronger than it had been, "you shouldn't be here." "That's becoming a habit with us," she replied with a small smile. "You telling me where I shouldn't be, and me ignoring you completely." A ghost of a smile touched his damaged lips. "Stubborn woman." "Fortunate for you that I am." Sarah leaned forward, still holding his hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of angry buffalo." Despite the attempt at humor, his eyes were serious as they studied her face. "You could have been killed, Sarah. Crawford was beyond reason." Not entirely beyond, Sarah countered. He's carried the guilt of that night for years, Stone. The fire that killed Rebecca and Beth, he was there. He helped set it believing the cabin would be empty. Stone's expression darkened with pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. I suspected as much. Harlan Crawford wasn't the type to do his own dirty work. His hand tightened around hers. Did Crawford tell you all of it about his father's death? Sarah nodded, that he took his own life, consumed by guilt. That Crawford has been blaming you all these years for a tragedy he helped create. Stone was quiet for a long moment, processing. Knew Harlan killed himself. Didn't know why until later when I heard rumors about his confession. By then, Ethan had taken over, was building the ranch into something bigger than his father ever managed. And you stayed away, built a solitary life. Seems safer for everyone. His eyes found hers intense despite his weakened state. Until Silverwind. Until you. The simple statement held volumes of meaning. Sarah felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. Sheriff Jenkins has taken Crawford into custody. He'll face charges for Emma's abduction, for the fire at the Wilson cabin, for what he did to you. Jenkins grew a conscience. Stone's skepticism was evident. I think he's been carrying his own guilt, Sarah suggested. Looking the other way while Crawford expanded his power, telling himself it wasn't his concern. Last night forced him to choose a side. Stone nodded slowly, wincing at the movement. And Turner. He helped you. He and his son Jacob. They risked a great deal. Need to thank them. Stone murmured, his eyes beginning to close despite his evident desire to stay awake. Need to thank you, but Sarah squeezed his hand gently. Rest now. We can talk more when you are stronger. Stone's eyes opened again with visible effort. Sarah, what I said before about claiming you was wrong way to say it, wrong words. Shh, she soothed, seeing how the conversation was taxing his limited strength. We have time for that discussion later. But Stone was determined, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. No, need to say it right. Not about claiming, about belonging together. The distinction moved her deeply. I understand, Stone. Do you? His gaze was intense despite his exhaustion. Understand, I'm asking you to build something with me. That cabin, that land, could be ours, if you wanted. Sarah felt tears spill over despite her efforts to contain them. Are you proposing Mason Rivers? Because if so, your timing is terrible. A real smile then transforming his battered face. Never claimed to have good timing, just good intentions. Sarah leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Then yes to building something together. Yes to the cabin and the land and whatever future we create there. Stone's eyes closed, satisfaction and exhaustion claiming him in equal measure. Good, he murmured as sleep overtook him. That's good. Sarah remained beside him, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the worst of her fear finally easing. Outside, she could hear the sounds of Silverwind coming to life. Wagon wheels on packed earth, voices calling greetings, the school bell ringing in the distance. Life continuing, but changed irrevocably by the events of the night. Changed for Stone, for Sarah, for Emma and Margaret, for the town itself. Old lies exposed old wounds, beginning the long process of healing. Sarah touched the wooden star she still wore around her neck, the one Stone had carved for her weeks ago. No longer just a reminder of possibilities, but a promise of them. A future waiting to be built one day at a time with patience and courage and love. Rest, she whispered to Stone's sleeping form. I'll be here when you wake. 6 months later, spring had come to the high country, painting the landscape in vibrant greens and wildflower yellows. The creek that bordered the northern edge of their property ran full with snowmelt, its cheerful gurgle a constant backdrop to their days. Sarah stood on the porch of the cabin, no longer abandoned, no longer a ruin, but a home reborn through careful hands and patient work. Stone had rebuilt it piece by piece, first the roof and windows, as he had planned, then the floors and walls, the stone hearth and chimney. Sarah had added her own touches. Curtains at the windows, bookshelves filled with volumes from her collection, and new ones ordered from Denver, a rocking chair positioned to catch the morning light. The door opened behind her, Stone's familiar presence, a comfort as he joined her on the porch. 6 months had erased the visible signs of his ordeal at Crawford's hands, though Sarah knew some of the deeper wounds, physical and otherwise, were still healing. "They're coming," he said, pointing to the road where a wagon approached Margaret Wilson at the reins, Emma's blonde braids visible beside her. Sarah smiled, anticipation warming her chest. Right on time. Emma's been counting the days. Stone's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. These casual affections had become more natural to him over the months of their marriage, his initial reserve gradually giving way to a quiet tenderness that never failed to move her. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice rumbling near her ear. "Taking on a child after everything?" Sarah turned to face him, her hand coming up to touch his cheek, thumb tracing the scar that remained above his eye. "Emma needs us. Margaret needs the care Denver can provide. And we—" She hesitated, smiling at the thought of the secret she carried, the new life growing within her that she had confirmed just days ago. "We have love to spare." Stone studied her face, something in her expression making him pause. "Sarah, is there something you're not telling me?" She laughed, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. "Perhaps. Something that will make Emma's arrival even more appropriate. Something that means she'll have a little brother or sister by winter." Understanding dawned slowly then, all at once. Stone's expression transformed wonder, replacing caution, joy overtaking restraint. "A baby, our baby." Sarah nodded, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Our baby, our family growing in all the best ways." Stone gathered her close, his embrace gentle, despite the emotion she could feel trembling through him. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For everything, for claiming me when I was lost." Sarah leaned back to meet his gaze, seeing in it all the love and healing and promise that had grown between them. "We claimed each other," she corrected softly, "and now we're building something wonderful together." The wagon drew closer, Emma already waving excitedly from her seat. Behind them, the cabin waited solid and welcoming. Before them, the land stretched green and fertile, ready for whatever they might plant. And between them, a future unfolding built on truth and courage and the quiet strength of hearts that had found their way home. Sarah took Stone's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work, the strength that had always been used to protect rather than harm. Together they stepped forward and to welcome Emma to expand their family once more, to continue the story that had begun on a stormy night when a lonely teacher had been claimed by a wounded soul seeking redemption. Not an ending, Sarah thought, as Emma leapt from the wagon and ran toward them, arms outstretched, but the most beautiful of beginnings.